Hello everyone, how are you? I hope you're all doing well. Before we start the video, let's try to reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. Your support means a lot to me and helps me continue creating more content for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and support me. I truly appreciate every single one of you. And now, without further ado, let's get started. I have told this story exactly twice. Once in a deposition room in Reno in March of 2010, where I was asked to keep my answers responsive to the questions, and once to a priest in Elko who was kind to me and who did not believe a word of it. Both times I left out the middle. The middle is the part that matters, and the middle is the part that sounds like a woman coming apart. So I gave them the beginning and the end and let them make of it what they wanted. I am 68 years old now. I do not have a career left to protect. The people who could have been hurt by this are dead, and the people who should have been hurt by it were never going to be. So there is no reason left to keep quiet except habit, and habit is not a reason. I want to start with the day I understood I had been wrong about the shape of the world for 51 years. It was September 9th, 2009, at approximately 6:15 in the morning, and I was parked on the shoulder of a 2-track road on the eastern rim of Pale Horse Basin, drinking coffee out of a thermos lid and counting pronghorn. That was actual work, by the way. People assume the counting is something rangers do to look busy. It is not. Pronghorn numbers in the basin had been in a slow decline since the mid-90s, and the state wildlife people wanted our informal counts to cross-check against their aerial surveys. So twice a week in the fall, I sat on that rim at dawn with binoculars and a clipboard, and I counted animals, and I liked the work, because it was quiet, and it required nothing of me except attention. There were 58 of them that morning, spread across maybe a mile and a half of flat, working through the rabbit brush in that scattered, unhurried way pronghorn have when nothing is wrong. Some grazing, some standing, 2 young bucks doing a half-serious shoving match near a dry wash. Ordinary. I had been watching that same herd more or less for 11 years. The sun was not up over the rubies yet, but the light was coming. That gray-blue light that makes the sage look like water. It was cold, maybe 38 degrees. There was no wind at all, which I noted because in Pale Horse Basin there is nearly always wind, and its absence is the kind of thing you register without knowing why. Then every animal in the herd stopped moving. I want to be careful in how I describe this, because it is the hinge that everything else swings on, and if I describe it badly, you will file it under startled animals and stop listening. When pronghorn are alarmed, the alarm travels. One animal catches something, a scent, a movement, and it goes rigid, and the animals nearest it notice and go rigid, and you can watch the alertness spread outward across the herd like a ring on water. It takes 2-3 seconds to cross a group that size. You can see it move. I had watched it happen 1,000 times. This was not that. There was no ring, no spread, no first animal. 58 pronghorns spread across 1.5 miles of open ground lifted their heads at the same instant. Not nearly the same instant. The same instant. Grazing animals, standing animals, the 2 bucks mid-shove, all of them at once. Heads up, bodies turned to face north-northwest, toward the low black ridge that separated the basin from the flats beyond it. And then they held. That is the part I still see when I close my eyes. My name is Della Marchetti. In September of 2009, I was 51 years old, a GS-9 wilderness ranger with the Bureau of Land Management, assigned to the Pale Horse Field Office in northeastern Nevada. I had been in that office 11 years, which was longer than anyone else on the staff except the realty specialist, and considerably longer than any of the 4 field managers I outlasted. I need to tell you who I was, because later on I am going to describe things that will make you want to know whether I was reliable, and it is better if you can decide that early. I grew up in Winnemucca. My father drove a water truck for a mining outfit, and my mother taught 4th grade for 31 years. I got a 2-year degree in range science at Great Basin College, worked seasonal fire for 4 summers, and then took a permanent job with the Bureau in 1983 because it had a pension, and because I discovered I would rather be alone outdoors than in a room with people. I was married once for 9 years to a good man named Aaron who wanted children and a town, and I gave him neither, and he left without meanness, which I have always been grateful for. There was nobody after that. I had a dog named Pilot for 12 years, and when he died I did not get another one, which my sister took as evidence of something. Nobody who worked with me would have called me imaginative. I want that on the record. I was the person in the office who read the regulations. When the Battle Mountain crew wanted to reroute a trail without doing the cultural survey, I was the one who made them do the cultural survey. I filed my reports on time. I had never in my life had a religious experience, seen a ghost, or believed in one. When our seasonal tech, Robbie Feld, told me in 2006 that he had seen a mountain lion the size of a horse near Fish Creek, I told him that he had seen a mountain lion, and that mountain lions look enormous when you are frightened, and I wrote in my log lion sighting, unremarkable. That was me. My field area was about 400,000 acres of the Eastern District. High desert, cold desert, whatever you want to call it. Sagebrush steppe on the flats, juniper and mountain mahogany on the slopes, aspen pockets in a few of the north-facing draws where the snow lingered. Elevation ran from about 5,200 feet on the basin floor to a little over 9,000 on Cradle Peak. It is not the country people imagine when they hear Nevada. There are no dunes. It is not flat. It is a corrugated place, basin and range, one long north-south valley after another with a wall of mountains between each, repeating out to the horizon like something a machine made. Pale Horse Basin was the middle of my area, and the emptiest part of it. About 30 miles long and 11 wide at its widest, running roughly north-northwest to south-southeast, between the Little Antelopes on the west, and a low unnamed ridge on the east that everyone called the Blacks, because of the color of the rock. Playa in the center, dry 11 months a year. 2 seasonal creeks. 1 spring, at Weems Ranch on the southwest edge. No paved roads, no power lines, no cell coverage, then or now. The nearest town was Del Springs, population 340 at the 2000 census, 41 miles from the field station by dirt and gravel. It had a school that took kids through 8th grade, a bar called the Ace that also sold gasoline, and a Mormon church. My office was in Del Springs in a metal building shared with the fire cache, but I spent most of my working life in a 1997 Ford F-250 with a bureau shield on the door and 190,000 miles on it, and about 60 nights a year in a canvas wall tent or the back of the truck. The only other person I talked to regularly was Hollis Pine. Hollis was 63 that fall. He had been a wildlife biologist with the state for 22 years, and then, after a divorce and something he never fully explained involving a supervisor in Ely, had taken a contract position doing sage grouse-lek surveys that paid about a third of what he was worth. He lived alone in a converted school bus at the edge of a piece of private ground east of the Blacks, and he had a ham setup and a repeater on Cradle Peak, and most evenings around 8 he and I talked on the radio for 10 or 15 minutes about nothing. I want to say something about Hollis now while I can do it plainly. He was the most careful observer I have ever known. He would not tell you a bird was a brewer's sparrow until he was sure, and if he was not sure he said so, and if he had said so and then found out he was right, he did not mention it again. He kept notebooks going back to 1979 in a footlocker under his bed, indexed by year, and he could find any observation in any of them inside 2 minutes. He had a bad hip and a worse temper about paperwork, and he was the only person in my adult life I could sit next to in silence for an hour, without either of us feeling that something needed to be done about it. He is dead now. I will get to that. The last thing I want to establish before I go on is how well I knew that country. Not to boast, because it matters. I knew where the pronghorn wintered and where they fawned. I knew which of the 2 creeks went dry first in a bad year, and I knew that the eastern one, Sawmill Creek, had gone dry in 1988 and again in 2002, and both times had come back. I knew where every wild horse band in the basin watered and roughly how many animals were in each. I knew the location of 41 archaeological sites, of which the state knew about 29. I knew where a Basque sheepherder had carved his name and the year 1913 into an aspen in the Little Antelopes, and I knew where a Cessna had gone down in 1971 and where the pieces still were. And I knew which stretch of the Blacks you could get a truck over and which stretch would tear the transfer case out from underneath you. That basin was the most stable, most legible, most known thing in my life. I trusted it in the way you trust your own kitchen in the dark, which is why what began in September of that year did not frighten me at first. It confused me. And confusion for a person like me is a problem to be worked, and I worked it for 9 weeks with all the patience and method and stubbornness I had. And I want you to understand that every single step I took toward the answer was reasonable and correct, and took me closer to a place I should never have gone. I did what I would have told anybody to do. I wrote it up. The entry in my field log for September 9th reads, in full, 06150622, E-rim PHB above coyote tank. Antelope, 58 animals. Herd alerted simultaneously, held approx 8 to 10 seki facing NNW, then ran SSE as a single group, no scatter, no stragglers. Left basin over sawmill grade. Duration approx 7 min, cause not observed. Note, no wind, no birds heard. That last clause I added an hour later, after I had driven down into the basin and spent 40 minutes trying to find whatever had moved that herd. I want to be honest about what I was looking for. I was looking for a cougar, or a pack of dogs. There were feral dogs in that country. 3 of them had been shot near Del Springs in 2007 after killing a calf, or people. Antelope hunting season had opened in August, and it was possible some idiot with a rifle had come up the north end on an ATV and pushed the herd. That was my leading theory, and it was a good one, because it accounted for the direction and the speed. It did not account for the formation, and it did not account for the 8 to 11 seconds of stillness, and it did not account for the fact that I drove the north end of that basin for 40 minutes and found no fresh vehicle track of any kind on ground that holds a tire print for weeks. But it was still my leading theory when I got back to the station that night, because the alternative was that I did not have a theory, and I was not the sort of person who was comfortable with that. The birds, though, the birds bothered me. Here is the thing that nobody who has not spent thousands of hours alone outdoors will understand. Places have a sound floor, not silence, a floor. Even in cold desert in September, even at dawn, there is a continuous low texture. Horned larks, sage sparrows, ravens somewhere, the tick of insects in the brush, wind in the sage, which is a specific sound, dry and papery and unlike wind in anything else. You do not hear the floor. You hear things that stand out from it. But your nervous system knows it is there, and when it goes, some very old part of you sits up. That morning, standing on that rim in the dark before the light came, there had been no floor. I had noticed it and dismissed it, and then remembered it an hour later with my hand on the truck door. I noted it. I moved on. I had a grazing compliance check scheduled in the Little Antelopes that week and a culvert to look at on the Sawmill Road, and I did those things, and for 4 days, nothing else happened. On September 13th, I found the first one. I was on foot, working a fence line on the east side of the basin about a mile south of Coyote Tank. Somebody's cattle had been getting through, and the permittee said it was our fence, and I said it was his fence, and the way you resolve that is, you walk the fence. It was warm, mid-70s, early afternoon. I was maybe 2 miles from the truck. The mule deer was lying in a shallow swale about 30 yards off the fence line, in the open, in a patch of low rabbit brush. A doe, adult, maybe 4 or 5 years old, in good condition. And I mean genuinely good condition, fat on her, coat slick, nothing wrong with her feet or teeth. She was lying on her side with her legs folded under her the way a deer lies down to rest. There was no wound, not a scratch. No blood on the ground and none in her nostrils or mouth. No claw marks, no punctures, no torn hide, no missing hair. Nothing had fed on her, which after however many days she had been out there was the strangest part of it. No coyote, no raven, no magpie, no eagle, nothing. Her eyes were intact. In that country, a dead animal in the open is a raven's banquet inside of 6 hours, and her eyes were intact. The ground around her was undisturbed. No thrashing, no dug-in hoof marks, no sign that she had struggled or convulsed or gone down hard. Just a deer, lying in the brush, in a place where deer lie down. I put on a nitrile glove. I carried them for handling scat samples. And I checked her over anyway, methodically, the way I would document any mortality. Then I photographed her from 6 angles with the office Nikon, recorded the coordinates, and called it in when I got back in cell range 2 days later. The state wildlife biologist for that region was a woman named Priya Ganguly, who I had worked with for years and liked. She asked the questions you would expect. Was there a lightning scar on a nearby tree? No trees. Poison? No evidence, and we had no bait stations within 40 miles. EHD, epizootic hemorrhagic disease, which shows up in Nevada deer in warm falls. Possible, she said. But EHD deer nearly always die at water, and this animal was 1.5 miles from the nearest water. Anthrax was theoretically possible and functionally absurd. She said if I found another one, she wanted a head and a tissue sample. I found another one on September 21st. Male, this time, a young buck, about 2 miles north of the first, in the same condition. Untouched, unfed upon, no wound, lying in a resting posture in the open. 9 days apart and 2 miles apart, and I stood over that second animal for a long time with a very cold feeling in my stomach. Because 2 is not a coincidence, 2 is a pattern, and I had been in that job long enough to know that the moment you see a pattern, you are already behind it. I took the head. It is an unpleasant job, and I will not describe it. I packed it in a cooler with dry ice from the ACE and drove it 110 miles to the state lab in Elko myself, because I did not trust the male, and I filled out the chain of custody, and I drove home. The lab work came back on October 6th. No EHD, no blue tongue, no anthrax, no plague, no rabies, no chronic wasting, no toxicology hits, no strychnine, no 1080, no organophosphates, no lead, nothing. Liver and kidney values unremarkable. The animal, as far as the pathologist could determine, had been perfectly healthy at time of death. But there were 2 lines in that report that I read 40 or 50 times over the following weeks. The first was under gross findings. The pathologist had noted bilateral hemorrhage in the middle ear, small but present in both ears. She flagged it as consistent with barotrauma, pressure injury, the kind of thing you see in animals near an explosion, or in marine mammals near sonar. The second was in the adrenal analysis. Cortisol was elevated, not slightly. It was, in the pathologist's phrasing, among the highest values observed in this laboratory in a cervid, and she noted that levels of that magnitude were typically seen in animals that had undergone prolonged pursuit, an hour or more of being chased, or a long entanglement in a fence. An animal with no wound and no sign of struggle, lying down in the open as though it had chosen the spot, with blood in both ears and enough stress hormone in its blood to have been running for an hour. I called Priya. She was as baffled as I was. She said the barotrauma finding was almost certainly incidental, an artifact of the field decapitation or the freezing. And I said I had done the extraction carefully, and she said she believed me, and that it was still probably an artifact. She said she would flag it. She said if I found a third one, she would come out herself. She never got the chance because by the time I found the third one, on October 30th, I was not calling anybody anymore. The night after I got the lab results, I told Hollis about all of it on the radio. He listened without interrupting, which was normal for him, and when I finished, he did not say anything for 11 or 12 seconds, which was not. "Say the date of the antelope again," he said. September 9th, around 6:15 in the morning. More silence. Then, Della. On the morning of September 9th, I was at the Cold Springs Lek doing a late-season count, which is a waste of time in September, but they pay me to do it. That's about 9 miles north of your rim, other side of the Blacks. All right. At about 6 in the morning, I had 400 head of horses come through the gap below me. I sat up in my chair. 400. I counted 360, and I know I lost some. That's every band on the north end of that basin and probably some from the Antelope Valley side. Della, those bands do not mix. 16, 17 stallions running their harems within a quarter mile of each other and nobody fighting. Going south, not fast. That's the thing. They weren't running. They were traveling, at a good steady trot, and they did not stop. and there was no dust behind them from anything pushing them. Did you hear anything? That, said Hollis, is why I've thought about it every day since. No. It was dead quiet. 400 horses on hardpan ought to sound like the end of the world, and I remember thinking they sounded muffled, like I was hearing them through a wall. Did you report it? I put it in my notes. Who would I report it to? Wild Horse and Burro program would tell me they're horses and horses move. I told him about the birds. He said that on the morning of the 9th at the Cold Springs Lek, he had recorded. He went and got the notebook while I waited on the radio. No passerine activity. 5:40 to 0625. 45 minutes of no small birds at a site where he had 40 years of data saying there should be. There's one more thing, he said, and I want you to hear me say I don't know what it means. I've been coming to this basin since 1979. In August of 1994, I sat on the same rim you were on and watched the same herd, or its grandmothers, do the same thing. All at once, all facing north, then gone southeast in a bunch. I wrote it down. I wrote inexplicable in the margin, which I have written in a field notebook exactly twice in my life. 1994, August 22nd, 1994. Andela. I didn't think anything of it for 15 years, but there were 2 dead does that fall on the sawmill side that nobody could account for. The state took one and lost the sample. I remember being annoyed about it. That was the first night I got out the map. It was a 1/100,000 surface management map of the Pale Horse Quadrangle, the kind with the land status color-coded, and I had 4 or 5 of them because I wore them out. I spread it on the kitchen table in the little house the Bureau rented for me in Del Springs, and I marked what I had. The rim where the antelope alerted, the gap where Hollis's horses came through, the 2 dead deer, the Cold Springs Lek, and, because it was the only other thing I had, the spot where I had stood in October of 2008 and heard, for about 4 seconds, a sound I had written up at the time as a low-flying military aircraft, although I never saw one, and although Fallon's ranges are 200 miles southwest of there. 5 points. They did not make a circle around anything. That was what I expected, honestly. You expect a source. You expect the marks to arrange themselves around a center, the way tracks arrange themselves around a kill. They made a line. Not a perfect line. But if you laid a straight edge on that map, from the northwest corner of the quadrangle down through the basin to the southeast, all 5 points fell within about 2 miles of it, and the line ran the long axis of Pale Horse Basin, and every single animal I knew about had moved along it, southeastward, in the same direction, as though they were not fleeing a place but leaving a path. I sat and looked at that line for a while. Then I got up and got the older maps out of the file cabinet, because there was something about the shape of it I half recognized, and I could not think from where. It took me until nearly 1 in the morning to find it. It was on the 1998 Resource Management Plan Land Use Overlay, a big folded map that came with the plan document, showing every allocation and designation in the field office, grazing allotments, rights-of-way corridors, areas of critical environmental concern, wilderness study areas, mineral withdrawals, the kind of map that nobody looks at except when somebody wants to build something. Running the long axis of Pale Horse Basin, from the northwest corner of the quadrangle to the southeast, was a strip of land about 2.5 miles wide and roughly 31 miles long, cross-hatched in gray, with a small box in the legend that read Category 3, unsuitable for all authorized surface use. No new row, no lease, no permit. See Appendix K. I had worked in that office for 11 years. I had processed rights-of-way applications for 2 power lines, a fiber line, a gravel pit, and a communications site. I had helped write the grazing decisions for 4 allotments in that basin. I had never once heard anyone say the words Category 3, and I had never, not one time in 11 years, been asked to authorize anything inside that strip, which meant that in 11 years, no one had ever proposed anything there, or that if they had, it had been resolved before it ever reached my desk. I looked for Appendix K in the plan document. The plan was 460 pages with 14 appendices. There was no Appendix K. The appendices ran A through J, and then L. I want to be very clear about my state of mind at 1 in the morning on October 7, 2009. I did not think anything supernatural was happening. I thought I had found evidence of a bureaucratic irregularity, possibly a mineral withdrawal that had been classified for some defense-related reason, possibly something to do with a buried cable or an old test site. And I remember thinking this exact thing. Somebody hit a facility in my basin, and the animals can hear it. That theory was wrong. But it was the best theory available on the evidence I had, and I want to record that I reached it honestly, and that for about 3 weeks it made me feel much better, because a hidden facility is a thing men build, and men can be found and asked. The Pale Horse Field Office Records Room was a windowless space at the back of the metal building, 20 by 30 feet, 4 rows of lateral files, and a shelf of bound plan documents going back to 1964. It smelled like hot dust and toner. The fluorescent light in the northeast corner had a ballast that hummed at a pitch that gave me a headache in under 20 minutes, and I had submitted a work order about it 3 times over 6 years. I spent parts of 4 days in there between October 7th and October 15th. Here is what I was looking for, and here is what I found. The 1998 Resource Management Plan was the current plan. Plans get revised roughly every 15 to 20 years, and each revision carries forward the allocations of the previous one unless somebody actively changes them. So I went backward. The 1981 Management Framework Plan had the same strip, different terminology. It was called a Special Constraint Area, but the same footprint, the same 2.5 by 31 miles, the same long diagonal down the axis of the basin. The stated rationale was one sentence: constraint carried forward per 1971 decision. See decision file. The 1964 plan did not have it. In 1964, that basin had 3 grazing allotments running straight across where the strip would later be, and a proposed reservoir site at the south end, and a note about a potential recreation road. So it began in 1971. I looked for the 1971 decision file. The index card for it existed. Someone had typed PH 71004, decision and supporting documentation, Pale Horse Basin, 2 boxes. The boxes were not there. The shelf location on the card was row 3, shelf D, and row 3, shelf D held boxes labeled PH 71002, PH 71003, and PH 71006. 2 boxes gone, and nothing to say when. I did not immediately conclude anything sinister. Records go missing. Offices flood. In 1994, our office had a water heater fail over a long weekend and lost most of a decade of range files. So I went looking for the same material in other places, which is what you learn to do after 26 years. Nothing exists in only one file. And this is where it started to be strange. The Federal Register notice existed. In 1971, the Bureau would have had to publish a proposed withdrawal or classification. I found it on microfiche at the college library in Elko 2 weeks later. A short notice, dated May 1971, proposing classification of approximately 49,600 acres in Elko County as unsuitable for all forms of authorized surface use in the public interest, with no further explanation, and a 30-day comment period. That was all. There was no accompanying environmental documentation, because NEPA was a year old and nobody knew what they were doing yet. The livestock permits told a better story. The 3 allotments that had crossed that basin were canceled in 1971 and 1972, not reduced, canceled, and the permittees compensated with additional AUMs on ground 20 miles east that was, by any measure, worse country. One of them appealed. The appeal file was intact, and it was 200 pages long, and it went to the Interior Board of Land Appeals, and the permittee lost, and the reasoning in the decision is a masterpiece of saying nothing. The classification was within the Secretary's discretion, the record supported it, the appellant's economic injury was not sufficient to overcome the public interest determination. The permittee's name was Alvin Weems. Weems Ranch was still there on the southwest edge of the basin. Dorcas Weems, his daughter, was 81 years old and still living in the house, and I had been drinking her coffee twice a year for 11 years. I will get to Dorcas. I want to finish the archive first because there was one more thing in that records room. And it was the thing that turned my hidden facility theory into a hidden something else theory, and I want you to see it in the order I saw it. Buried in the 1981 plans correspondence file was a copy of a letter. It was addressed to the district manager, dated August 1979, from a man named Elias Kohut, who identified himself as a research hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, Water Resources Division, Carson City. It was one page, and it was written in the flat, aggrieved tone of a scientist who has already lost an argument. Kohut wrote that he had been asked to review the piezometric data from the 4 monitoring wells in the constraint area, and that he was declining to sign the summary as drafted. He wrote that the drafted summary characterized the observed water level fluctuations as seasonal recharge variation, and that he did not agree because the fluctuations were not seasonal, were not correlated with precipitation, and occurred in all 4 wells within intervals too short to be explained by transmissivity in that aquifer material. He wrote that the pattern more closely resembled a pressure pulse, propagating from north-northwest to south-southeast, at a rate he estimated at between 4 and 6 miles per day. Then he wrote a sentence I copied by hand into my notebook and have never forgotten. I am aware that the interpretation is unwelcome, but the data do not care whether we like them, and something is moving through that basin. There was no response letter in the file. There were no monitoring wells in the basin in 2009. I checked the state's well database that night and found 4 wells drilled in 1972 in Pale Horse Basin and abandoned, plugged and abandoned, formally, with paperwork, in 1980. 4 and 6 miles per day. I got out the map again. 31 miles of basin at 5 miles a day is about 6 days, and I sat there with a pencil in my hand at the kitchen table, and I did the arithmetic that any competent person would do, which was, if something entered that basin at the north end and went out the south end at 5 miles a day, and animals cleared out ahead of it, then the animals at the north end would run about 6 days before the animals at the south end. But that was not what happened. On September 9th, every animal in the basin, Hollis's horses 9 miles north of my rim, my antelope on the rim, had moved on the same morning, within an hour or so of each other, unless they had not been running from the thing itself, unless they had been running from the announcement of it, getting out of the way, clearing the road early, the way you get off a highway when you hear a siren, not when you see the truck. That is the thought I had on the night of October 15th, and it is the first thought I had in the whole business that was actually correct, and I did not believe it for another 3 weeks. Dorcas Weems was born in that basin in 1928 and had left it 4 times in her life, twice for surgeries in Salt Lake, once to bury a brother in Idaho, and once, in 1946, for a 2-week trip to San Francisco that she referred to for the rest of her life as when I went. She was a small, upright, unsentimental woman who wore men's work shirts and kept her hair in a braid the color of dirty snow, and she had run cattle by herself for the 18 years after her husband died, and then leased the grazing out and kept the house. Her eyes were sharp. She had a landline and no television and a stack of the Elko Daily Free Press by the stove that she used for kindling after she read it. I drove out there on the afternoon of October 17th with a box of the almond cookies she liked from the market in Wells, which was a 2-hour detour, and I did not tell her why I had come until we had been sitting at her kitchen table for 40 minutes talking about her hip and the price of hay and a neighbor's dogs. Then I said, "Dorcas, I want to ask you about 1971. She was pouring coffee. She did not stop pouring. She finished, set the pot down, and sat. "Which part of it?" she said. "Your father lost his permit." "He did. Do you know why?" Dorcas Weems looked at me across that table for what felt like a long time. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like a form she was deciding whether to fill out. "They told him the ground was being classified," she said. "He fought it for 2 years, and it cost him $9,000, which in 1972 was a house. He never got a reason he could repeat to another man without sounding foolish. Did he get one he couldn't repeat? That was the question, and I saw her decide. He got told, by a fellow from Reno who came out here in a government car and sat in that chair you're in. that the government had been advised that it wasn't a fit place to keep animals, she said. And my father said, "We've kept animals on it for 50 years. And the fellow said, "Yes, and how have they done?" She let that sit. "And how had they done?" I said. "Badly," said Dorcas. "And that's the part I've never told anybody except my husband, and he thought I was foolish, and I let him." Then she told me about the pulls. That is what her family called them. Not a good word, she said, but the only one they had. Every so often, no pattern anybody could hold on to. She remembered 1934, 1946, 1961, 1971, and she thought there had been one in the 50s that she had been away for. The stock would leave. "Cattle don't leave," she said. "You understand what I'm telling you. Cattle are the stupidest animal God made, and they will stand in a burning corral. But every so often in the fall, the whole herd would go out of that basin in a night, through the fence if the gate was shut, and we'd find them 15, 20 miles southeast, standing in a bunch on somebody else's ground, and they'd have run themselves down. Some of them would have run themselves down to where they never came right again, and the horses were worse." "Worse how?" "The horses went first," she said. "Always. Half a day before the cattle. My mother used to say the horses had the better ears." I asked her what her family thought was happening. "My grandmother was Shoshone on her mother's side," Dorcas said, "which was not a thing you announced in this county in 1930, so we did not announce it. And she said there was a road through this basin, not a road for people. She said her grandmother's people knew where it was and didn't camp on it. She said it had a season like the deer have a season." "Did she say what used it?" Dorcas turned her cup a quarter turn on the table. "She said it wasn't a what. She said asking what used it was like asking what uses a river." I want to be careful here because I am a white woman repeating a fragment of somebody's family memory at 2 removes, 60 years after the fact, and if I dress it up into a legend, I will have done something dishonest. So I will say only what she said. She said there was a road, that her grandmother's people knew where it was, that they did not camp on it, that it had a season, and that the question, what was the wrong question? Then she said the thing that made the back of my neck go cold. "You've got 2 dead deer," she said, "in the open. Fat ones, not chewed on." I had not told her about the deer. "Who told you that?" "Nobody told me. That's what it leaves." She looked at me with something that was not quite pity. "The ones that get caught in it don't get killed, Della. They get stopped. You find them lying down like they laid down. It's the ones that stay standing you want to worry about." "What do you mean, the ones that stay standing?" But she had said as much as she was going to say that day. She got up and put the cookies in a tin and asked me if I wanted to see what the pack rats had done to her tack room. And I understood that I was being dismissed, and I went and looked at the tack room and said something about steel wool, and I drove home in the dark. 2 miles from the ranch gate, I stopped the truck in the middle of the road and sat with the engine running and my hands on the wheel. I did not believe her. I want that recorded honestly, because it is the failure that everything after this depends on. I did not believe her. I thought I was listening to 80 years of ranch folklore built on top of a real phenomenon. Bad water, maybe, or a gas seep, or infrasound off the blacks in certain wind conditions, something with a physical mechanism that had been dressed in story the way people dress everything in story. I thought I was the person in this situation with the training. On October 19th, I called the USGS office in Carson City and asked whether Elias Kohut was still with them. He had retired in 1991. The woman I spoke to was helpful in the way that people are when a request is odd but harmless, and after 2 more calls and a week, I had a phone number in Grand Junction, Colorado. He answered on the 4th ring. He was 84 years old and his voice was thin, but there was nothing wrong with his mind. I told him who I was and where I was calling from, and I said the words, "Pale Horse Basin," and he did not say anything for so long that I thought the line had dropped. "You found the letter," he said. I found the letter. They said it wasn't in the file. It's in the 1981 plan correspondence filed under General. I think somebody pulled the decision file and missed a copy. Elias Kohut laughed. It was not a happy sound. 30 years, he said. All right, what do you want to know? What I wanted to know took 2 hours across 3 phone calls over 4 days, and I took 11 pages of notes, and here is the substance of it. In 1972, the Bureau had 4 monitoring wells drilled in the basin, 2 at the north end and 2 at the south, into the same alluvial aquifer. Kohut was assigned to the data. The wells were instrumented with float recorders producing continuous strip charts. For the first 4 years, nothing. Ordinary hydrographs, slow seasonal decline, spring recharge, the usual. In October of 1976, all 4 wells recorded a pressure event. Water levels rose, then dropped, then recovered, in a wave. Not simultaneously, sequentially. North wells first, south wells after, with a lag of about 4 days between the northernmost and the southernmost, which are 22 miles apart. That's 5.5 miles a day, I said. That is 5.5 miles a day, he agreed. In an aquifer where a pressure signal from pumping propagates at a rate you'd measure in hundreds of feet an hour, in the fast direction, there is no hydraulic mechanism that produces that. What produces it? A mass, he said. A mass moving through the medium, displacement. I ran it every other way for 2 years, Ms. Marchetti. Barometric loading, earth tides, seismic, thermal, a bad float in one instrument. You can rule a bad float out when 4 instruments 22 miles apart do the same thing in sequence. What that signal looks like is what you'd get if something the size of a building moved through the saturated zone from the north end of that basin to the south end at walking speed. I remember, I said. How deep? That's the question I got moved off the project for asking, he said. The screen intervals were between 130 and 200 feet, so somewhere in the upper 200 feet of unconsolidated material. That is not deep. There are wells in that county deeper than that. He had asked for 2 things. He had asked for a seismic array. Even 3 geophones, he said, would have settled it in one event. And he had asked for the wells to be re-instrumented with equipment capable of finer time resolution. He got neither. He was reassigned to a project in the Humboldt drainage in 1980, and the wells were plugged that same year, and he wrote the letter in 1979 as a way of putting his objection somewhere it could not be denied later, and it disappeared, and he spent the next decade being careful, and then he retired. Did you ever go out there? I asked him. In person? During an event? Once, he said. In October of 1978. I drove out because the North Wells had gone active on the chart the week before, and I wanted to be there when the pulse reached the south end. I got to the basin on the 12th or 13th, and I want to tell you something, and I want to tell you I have never known what to make of it. All right. There was nothing alive in that basin, he said. I don't mean it was quiet. I mean I stood on the road with a clipboard for 3 hours and I did not see a bird, an insect, a lizard, a rabbit, or a track that had been made that day. And the second thing is that I got a headache like nothing I've ever had, behind my eyes, and I had a nosebleed that would not stop for about 20 minutes. And I attributed all of it at the time to the altitude and the dry air, and I drove out. And I did not go back. I asked him the question I had been building to for 2 hours. Dr. Kohut, if you had to say what it is. I have had 30 years to think about that, and I have never once had a sentence I was willing to finish, he said. So I will tell you what I have instead, which is a comparison, and you can throw it away. There is a thing that happens in the Antarctic ice sheets. There are lakes under 2 miles of ice, and they fill, and when they fill they drain, and the water moves under the ice from one basin to another. And it happens on a schedule of years or decades, and if you were standing on the surface, you would never know. There is a whole hydrology up there that has nothing to do with the world we walk around in. It has its own seasons. It's been running that way for a long time, and it will keep running after we stop looking. Now, I do not think there is a lake under Pale Horse Basin, but I think there is a system under it that has a season, and I think it has been running for a very long time. And I think the reason we don't know about it is not that it's hidden. It's that it's slow, and it's under us, and we've been paying attention for about 140 years. I said, the animals know about it. Of course the animals know about it, said Elias Kohut. The animals have been paying attention for 2 million years. On October 24th, I asked my field manager about Category 3. I want to describe this carefully because I have thought about it more than almost anything else in this account, and because the answer I got is the reason I understand what kind of thing was actually going on. The field manager was a man named Gil Deshotel. He was 44, an MPA out of Arizona State, ambitious in the way that people are when the field office is a stepping stone to a state office job, and I did not dislike him. He was competent and a little frightened of the ranchers, and he approved my travel without arguing. I went into his office with the 1998 overlay map, and I put it on his desk, and I put my finger on the gray strip, and I said, "Gil, what is this?" He looked at it for a second and said, "Category 3, it's a legacy allocation. There's no Appendix K." "There's no what?" "The legend refers to Appendix K. The plan doesn't have an Appendix K." He turned the map around and read the legend box, and I watched him read it twice, and then he said, and I am confident he was being entirely honest, "Huh, well, that's a typo then. Probably an appendix that got dropped in the revision. What do you need it for?" And I said, "I've got some unusual wildlife mortality out there, and I want to know if there's something in that ground." Gil Deshotel leaned back in his chair and said the most illuminating thing anyone said to me that entire autumn. "Della, there is nothing in that ground. That is a nothing strip. I've been here 6 years, and I've never had a single action in it. And I'll tell you why. Because it's in the plan. And things that are in the plan don't generate work. If somebody applied for something in there, I'd deny it. And I'd deny it in about 4 minutes, because the plan says deny it. That's what the plan is for. It's a machine for not having to think." He was not covering anything up. He did not know anything to cover up. He had inherited a line on a map, and the line did what lines do, which is that it made a certain kind of question impossible to ask, and the reason nobody had asked it in 38 years was not that they had been silenced, but that the map had already answered it. Somebody in 1971 knew something, and instead of writing it down, which would have required saying it out loud, they did the thing that bureaucracies are actually superb at. They made it administratively impossible for anyone to go there, and then they retired, and the fact traveled forward for 4 decades disguised as a procedure. It nearly worked forever. What broke it was money. On October 27th, in the Elko paper, on page 6, there was a short article about a proposed solar generation facility. A company out of Nevada and Delaware with a name like a law firm had filed a right-of-way application with the Bureau for a photovoltaic project, 800 megawatts, on public land in Elko County, and the article said the application covered approximately 11,000 acres and had been accepted for processing in September. I drove to the office at 9 at night and let myself in and pulled up the case file in LR 2000, which is the Bureau's realty database, and I found the serial number, and I mapped the legal description township by hand, because the GIS layer had not been built yet. Sections 4 through 9 and 16 through 21 of T39N R58E, and a piece of the next township north. The north end of Pale Horse Basin, straddling the strip. About 14,000 acres of the proposed project area lay inside Category 3. The application had been accepted for processing on September 8, 2009. The pronghorn ran on the morning of September 9th. I sat in that dark office in front of a computer screen, and I felt something I can only describe as the floor of the world moving under me, because I had been building a theory in which the animals had detected something, a physical signal, a pressure wave, a sound below hearing, and every part of that theory was a machine that ran on cause and effect in a direction I understood. And now I had a fact that did not fit anywhere in it. 11 miles of empty desert and a herd of antelope, and a filing date in a database in Reno. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself that for 6 weeks. I am telling you now that I did not believe it even at the time. and that the not believing sat in me like a swallowed stone. Here is where I have to describe the sequence of events in November, and here is where people stop being able to follow me, so I'm going to go slowly and give you dates. November 2nd, I found the third deer. Adult doe, north end of the basin, same presentation, no wound, no scavenging, resting posture, good condition. I did not report it. I photographed it and I logged the coordinates in my personal notebook and not in the field log, and if you want to date the beginning of my professional misconduct, date it there. I also found, 60 yards from the deer, in a patch of fine silt in a dry wash, a boot print. It was a Vibram lug sole, size 11 or 12, deep enough that whoever made it was carrying weight. It was less than a day old, because we had had wind on the first that would have softened it. I followed it for about 400 yards and lost it on hardpan, and I found it again a quarter mile on, and it went north-northwest, into the strip, and it was not alone. There were 2 sets. Nobody walks into the middle of Pale Horse Basin in November. There is nothing there. There is no hunting, there is no water, there is no route to anywhere. I photographed the prints with a scale. I still have those photographs. November 4th. I drove the north end looking for a vehicle and found one. A white Ford Expedition, no markings, parked on the 2-track 2 miles inside the Category 3 boundary. There was nobody in it. I ran the plate through dispatch in Elko, and dispatch came back and said the plate returned to a leasing company in Sparks and asked if I needed a welfare check, and I said no. I put a card under the wiper with my name and number, and please contact BLM Pale Horse Reactivity and Restricted Allocation. Nobody called. November 6th. The expedition was gone. In the place where it had been parked, there were 4 steel stakes with orange flagging, set in a square about 30 feet on a side, and in the center of the square the ground had been disturbed. A hole about 8 inches across, refilled and tamped, with a small amount of drill cuttings scattered nearby. Fine gray material, not local surface material. Somebody had put a hole in the ground in the middle of the strip. I bagged a sample of the cuttings, which I still have, and which I never had tested, and which sat in my garage in Winnemucca for 16 years, in a paper sack labeled PHB 110609 in my handwriting. November 7th. I called the realty specialist in the state office in Reno, a woman I had worked with on a fiber line in 2004, and asked her, casually, as a favor, to tell me who was doing geotechnical work on the solar application. She called me back that afternoon and said the applicant's consultants had done a geotech program in late October and early November, 12 boreholes, standard for a project like that, and that she could email me the notice. Then she said, "Della, can I ask you something off the record?" "Sure." "That application, did somebody at your office flag a conflict on it?" "Not that I know of." "Why?" "Because the case has been reassigned twice in 8 weeks and it's got a hold on it now from somebody at Interior I've never heard of. And I've been doing this for 19 years and I have never seen a hold come down from that level on a solar row in Elko County." November 9th. Hollis called me on the radio at 6:40 in the morning, which was not our hour, and said, "Della, get in your truck." I asked him what. "The horses are gone," he said. "All of them. And I mean gone. I've been up on the saddle since first light and there is not a horse north of the Blacks, and there's something else and I want you to hear it from me before you see it. I'm looking at 3, maybe 400 head of antelope standing on Weems's south fence line. Standing, Della, not moving, all facing the same way." "Facing where?" "North," said Hollis. I made it to the south end of the basin at 8:15. He was right. I estimated between 350 and 400 pronghorn, which is more animals than that entire district was supposed to hold, packed into a strip along the fence about a half-mile long. Antelope do not bunch like that. They are not herd-dense animals. They hold spacing. They were shoulder to shoulder in places. They were facing north. They were absolutely still, and on the far side of them, mixed in with them and not being troubled by them, were mule deer, 40 or 50. And on the periphery, coyotes. I counted 9 coyotes standing within 100 yards of 400 antelope, and none of them were hunting, and none of the antelope were reacting. I have thought about that image every day of my life since. I got the spotting scope out of the truck and set it on the hood, and I looked at those animals for 20 minutes, and I could not find a single one that was grazing. Hollis came down off the ridge in his old Bronco and parked next to me, and we stood there together. "How long have they been like that?" I said. "Since first light, at least." "They'll break. They can't hold that." "They've been holding it 4 hours." I said. "It's coming south, isn't it?" And Hollis Pine, who had never in his life told me a thing he was not sure of, said, "Something's coming south." What we did over the next 4 days was reasonable, and it was useless, and I want it in the record anyway, because when the investigation happened afterward, the finding was that I had acted outside the scope of assigned duties without notification, and that is true, and it is also not the whole of it. November 10th. I called Gil Deshotel at home on a Tuesday night and told him that there was unauthorized surface disturbance inside the Category 3 allocation, that I had photographs of a drill hole and stakes, and that I wanted a stop work order issued against the applicant's consultants. He was good about it, actually. He said, "Get me the coordinates and the photos, and I'll call Reno in the morning." He called me back at 11 the next day and said the geotech program had been authorized under a categorical exclusion, signed at the state office, and that he had been told, in a tone he did not appreciate, that the Pale Horse Field Office was not the decision-maker on this one. "I'm going to write it up anyway," he said, and I believe he did, and it is not his fault that nothing came of it. November 11th. I called Priya Ganguly at the State Wildlife Office and told her about the aggregation on the Weems fence line. She was genuinely excited. She had never heard of pronghorn bunching at that density outside of a fenced elk feed ground situation, and she said she would come out on the 16th with a graduate student to document it. The 16th was 2 days too late. I have not stopped thinking about the fact that if she had come on the 13th, I would have had a witness with credentials, and possibly a second body in the basin, and I do not know which of those thoughts is worse. November 12th. I drove to Elko and used a computer at the library, because by then I had a feeling about my office machine that I would not have been able to defend, and I did 2 things. The first was that I looked for other Category 3 allocations. There is a national database of land use plan allocations, or at least there was a rudimentary one, and I searched the field office plans I could get at electronically for that specific phrase. I found 3 more, one in the Owyhee uplands in southeastern Oregon, a strip about 20 miles long, established 1968. One in the Escalante Desert in Utah, established 1974. One in the Big Smoky Valley south of us, established 1971, the same year as ours. All 4 were long, narrow, straight, and oriented roughly northwest to southeast. The Big Smoky one and ours, if you extended them on a map, were not on the same line, but they were parallel to within a few degrees. I sat in that library and drew the extensions on a Nevada highway map with a ballpoint pen, and I understood that I was doing something that a person in a documentary about a paranoid man does, and I did it anyway, because the lines were parallel and I had not made them parallel. The second thing I did was look up the death of a survey crew. Dorcas had said a thing to me at the very end of my visit, at the door, in the voice people use when they have decided to give you one more thing and no more. She said, "Ask about the boys from the mapping outfit in '68. The Elko paper had it in the archive on microfilm. October 1968. 3 men on a contract survey crew, working out of Del Springs, doing section corner recovery in the basin for a mapping contract. Their vehicle was found on the 22nd. The men were not. 2 of them were never found. That is a matter of public record, and you can check it. The 3rd was found 11 days later, 26 miles southeast, walking on the shoulder of the state highway near Curry. He was 31 years old, and his name was Merle Sackett, and he was in reasonably good physical condition considering, and he was, in the language of the newspaper article, unable to assist investigators. There was a follow-up article in January of 1969. Merle Sackett had been evaluated at the state hospital in Sparks. He was oriented to person, but not to time or place. He was not injured. There was no evidence of head trauma, no evidence of intoxication, no fever. He could answer questions about his childhood. He could not form new memories at all. Everything after the 22nd of October slid off him. The article said that his family had taken him home to Idaho. It said that his sister had told the reporter that when the wind came up outside the house, Merle would stand up and face into it. November 13th. In the afternoon, a man came to my office. I have never known who he actually was. He introduced himself as Warren Tice and said he was with the Department of the Interior, Office of the Solicitor, and he had a card that said so, and a federal ID that I looked at for maybe 2 seconds because I was not expecting to need to remember it. He was about 60, soft-spoken, gray suit and hiking boots, which is a combination you see in that agency, and which normally means somebody who came up through the field. He asked if we could talk in my office, and I said we could. He said he understood I had raised a concern about surface disturbance and a legacy allocation. I said I had. He asked if I would tell him what I had observed. I did. The deer, the aggregation, the drill hole, and I did not mention Kohut or Dorcas, and I do not know to this day why I held those back except that I did. He listened the way Hollis listened, which is to say completely. Then he said, "Ms. Marchetti, I'm going to tell you 2 things. The first is that the geotechnical program in that area is being terminated, as of this morning. The applicant is going to be told that the northern portion of their project area is unavailable, and that they can either redesign or withdraw." I said that was good news. "The second thing," he said, "is that I'd like you to stay out of the basin for the next 10 days. I asked him why, and he said, and I remember the exact phrasing because it was the phrasing of a man who had spent a long career learning how to say things that were true and useless at the same time. Because the allocation exists for a reason, and the reason is seasonal, and this is the season. I said, "What is it?" "I don't know," said Warren Tice. "That's not an answer. It's the only true one I have. I've had this file for 9 years. There is no document anywhere in the department that says what it is. There is a decision from 1971 that says the land is unsuitable, and there is an oral tradition inside a very small number of positions that says the decision was correct and that you leave it alone. And I inherited that from a man who inherited it from a man. And every one of us has spent our careers making sure that nothing is built there and nobody is standing there in October or November. And we have not been curious, and I want to be clear with you that the lack of curiosity is deliberate, and it is the only part of this that I am proud of." I said, "People died out there in 1968. "Yes. And nobody wrote it down." "Somebody wrote it down in 1971, he said, "and what they wrote down was a boundary. Ms. Marchetti, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that's adequate. I'm telling you it's what there is. Stay out of the basin for 10 days, please." He left. I never saw him again, and 11 years later I tried to find him and could not, and the office of the solicitor had no record of an attorney by that name, which either means something or means that I misheard a name over 16 years of remembering it. He was right about the geotechnical program. It stopped. The applicant redesigned the project south and west by 9 miles, and it was eventually built. And it is generating power today, and if you drive that highway you can see it. And the northern 14,000 acres they wanted are still empty. I did not stay out of the basin. November 14th, 2009. Hollis called me at 4:52 in the morning. I know the time because the call woke me and I looked at the clock radio. "They're moving," he said. "The antelope?" "Everything." His voice was strange. Not frightened fast, the way a person sounds when they are describing something while it happens. "I'm on the saddle above the Weems place. Della, the whole aggregation is going southeast, all of it, and it's not a run, it's a walk. They're walking. 400 antelope walking southeast at first light in a body, and the deer are with them, and there are coyotes in the middle of them." I was pulling my boots on with the phone against my shoulder. "How far?" "They're already past the fence. They'll be over the Curry Divide by 9. "Hollis, don't go into the basin." "I'm on the saddle. I'm above it. I'm fine. Get up here." I want to record what I did next in the correct order, because at the deposition I was asked about it repeatedly. I put on field clothes. I filled 2 water bottles. I took the office Nikon, my binoculars, my personal notebook, a handheld GPS, and my radio. I did not take the bureau truck. I took my own truck, a 1994 Toyota, and I have thought about why for a long time. And the answer is that I already knew I was doing something I did not want to be doing officially, and that when a person makes a choice like that, they are usually further along than they think. I did not call Gildish Hotel. I did not call dispatch. I did not tell anyone where I was going. I left Del Springs at 5:30. It is 41 miles of dirt to the south end of the basin, and I made it in a little over an hour. The first thing I noticed, coming down the last grade with the sun not up yet, was that my ears felt wrong. Not blocked, not popping, full. The sensation you get in an elevator in a tall building, or at the bottom of a swimming pool, except that it did not resolve when I swallowed, and it did not resolve when I opened my jaw, and it stayed at exactly the same intensity for the next 4 hours, and I noticed it and filed it and kept driving, because I had a friend on a ridge and animals moving and I was thinking about none of the right things. The second thing I noticed was the silence. I have described the sound floor. I want to try to describe its absence one more time and better. I stopped the truck at the mouth of the basin at 6:40 and got out to open a gate, and when I shut the truck door, the sound of the door shutting did not go anywhere. There was no echo, which was normal. There is nothing out there to echo off. But there was also no carry. The sound went about 10 feet and stopped, as though the air had stopped conducting past a certain radius. And under it, behind it, in it, there was nothing at all. No wind, no insects, no birds, not one raven. And there are always ravens. There are ravens at the end of the world. I stood by that gate with my hand on the cold steel, and every animal instinct I have was telling me to get in the truck and drive south. And I overrode it. Because I was 51 years old and educated, and it was 2009 and I had a camera. That is the whole failure right there. That is the thing I have spent 16 years turning over. The animals had a system for this that was 2 million years old and correct, and I had a system for it that was about 400 years old, and that told me to gather data. I met Hollis on the saddle at 7:20. He was out of the Bronco with his binoculars up and his notebook open on the hood, and he was writing while he watched, which was how he did everything. He had on his canvas coat and a wool cap, and he was smiling at me, and I wanted to be able to hold on to that. "Look at it," he said. I looked at it. Below us, moving southeast across the last 4 miles of Pale Horse Basin in the early light, was every large animal for 30 miles. I could not count them. The estimate I gave the investigation was 600 pronghorn, 80 to 100 mule deer, at least 20 coyotes, and, this is the part they cut from the report, 3 mountain lions walking in the open, within sight of each other and of the herd in daylight. They were not running. They were walking, in a broad front about a mile wide, at maybe 4 miles an hour southeast, and there was no dust because the ground was damp from a rain on the 11th and there was no sound. 600 animals moving on hardpan, and I could not hear them from a mile away. "How long have your head hurt?" Hollis said. "Since I came down the grade." "Mine too. Started about 6. He lowered the glasses. "Della, my compass is turning." He handed it to me. It was a good Silva baseplate compass, and the needle was rotating slowly and steadily, clockwise, taking about 40 seconds to make a full revolution. I have been asked about this many times. I do not have an explanation. I know what a compass does near a truck, near a magnet, near iron-rich rock. I know what a slow, steady rotation is not. We watched the front of the animals reach the southeast rim and go over it and start down the far side and keep going. And then I made the decision that I have to live with. I said, I want to see the north end. Hollis looked at me for a long moment. "They're all going south," he said. "That's why." Whatever's behind them, it's still north of here, and it's coming this way at 5 miles a day. If I get up on the blacks at the sawmill gap, I'm 400 feet above the floor and I can see 15 miles of basin. I can photograph it. Hollis, we can see it. Or we can go southeast with the antelope, said Hollis Pine. I said, I've got a job. He closed his notebook and put it in his coat pocket, and he said the last complete sentence he ever said to me, which was, all right, but we take one truck and I'm driving, because your Toyota won't get up that gap. We got in the Bronco. We drove north up the Basin Road at about 20 miles an hour for 11 miles, into it, against the direction of every living thing in that country. At the 8-mile mark, my nose started bleeding. At 9, his did. We laughed about it. I want that in the record too. We laughed, and he handed me a shop rag off the floor of the Bronco, and I remember him saying something about the altitude, which was a joke because there is no altitude. At 8:55 in the morning, we reached the base of the sawmill gap and got out. The pressure in my ears had become something I would describe as weight, not pain. So I walked. I walked south down the Pale Horse Basin Road at about 9:50 in the morning on November 14th, 2009, and behind me I could hear the starter turning, and I did not turn around because I was afraid that if I turned around I would go back. It caught. I heard the engine catch, I heard it settle into an idle, and I stopped and I turned around, and the Bronco was 50 yards behind me with the hood still up, and Hollis was standing at the front bumper with both hands on the fender facing north. I called his name. He did not turn. He was standing, facing north, the way Merle Sackett's sister said Merle would stand up and face into the wind. And I have known since that morning that I had about 10 seconds in which I could have run back and taken hold of him and pulled, and I have never been able to decide whether I did not do it because I was frightened, or because some part of me understood that it would not have made any difference, and the truth is probably that I was frightened. I did not go back. I turned around and I ran south. I ran for what the GPS later told me was 2 3/4 miles, and then I walked, and then I ran again. And the last thing I am able to report from any position of reliability is that at some point in the first mile, the pressure went out of my ears all at once, like a door closing somewhere behind me, and the sound came back, the whole floor of it, wind and brush and my own breathing and, God help me, a raven. And I sat down in the road and I could not get up for a while. I got to the Weems place a little before 2 in the afternoon. Dorcas Weems, 81 years old, saw me come up her drive on foot and did not ask me a single question. She sat me at the table and put a cup of coffee in front of me and she said, "Was it Hollis or was it you?" I said, "Hollis." And she said, "Then he's gone, honey." And she put her hand on the back of my neck and held it there. And that is the last unambiguous kindness in this account. Search and rescue went in on the morning of November 15th, which was 18 hours later, because that is how long it took me to convince the Elko County Sheriff's Office that a 63-year-old man in a running vehicle on a county road was a missing person and not a man who had gone to town. I did not go in with them. I asked to, and I was told no, and by then Gil Deshotel had arrived and had taken one look at me and put me in the passenger seat of his Suburban. They found the Bronco at 10:40 in the morning at the base of the Sawmill Gap, exactly where it had been, with the hood down and the keys in the ignition and about a quarter tank of gas. It started on the first turn. Hollis's coat was folded on the driver's seat. His notebook was in the coat pocket. His glasses were on the dash. They ran dogs. The dogs would not work. I was not there for that, but I have read the report, and the report says, in the flat language those reports use, that both K9 teams were unable to establish or follow a track, and that the handlers noted unusual reluctance. One of the dogs, a Belgian Malinois with 6 years of experience, would not get out of the vehicle. They searched for 9 days with about 60 people in 2 aircraft. They found nothing. Not a boot print, not a scrap, not a body. There were 60 searchers on that basin floor for 9 days in late November, and not one of them reported feeling anything at all. And I believe them, because by the 15th it was past. The sage on the flat below the gap was pale and canted southeast in a band 200 yards wide, and everybody who walked through it, and one of the searchers made a remark about grazing pressure, and it went in nobody's report but mine. They found the deer, though. 11 of them, along both edges of that band, plus 2 coyotes and 1 adult mountain lion, an animal that had been in perfect health. No wounds, no scavenging, resting posture. The state took 4 heads. 3 came back with elevated cortisol, and 1 came back with bilateral middle ear hemorrhage, and a wildlife health specialist in Reno wrote a note about the possibility of a localized lightning event, and that is the official explanation to this day. And lightning does not occur in that basin in November, and does not kill 14 animals in a 200-yard wide strip 31 miles long over the course of 40 years. The investigation into my conduct took 4 months. The findings were that I had entered the field on a non-duty day in a personal vehicle without notifying dispatch, that I had failed to report a wildlife mortality on November 2nd, that I had removed a physical sample from public land without a permit, and that my account of the events of November 14th was not corroborated by physical evidence. I was given a letter of reprimand and reassigned at the same grade to the Winnemucca district, 60 miles from where I was born. Nobody ever accused me of hurting Hollis Pine. I want to say that because when I tell people about the deposition, they always assume that is what it was about. It was not. The sheriff's office cleared me in a week. There was no evidence of anything, and there was nothing in 20 years of 2 people's lives to suggest a motive, and everyone who knew us knew. What the deposition was about was liability. The applicant had a right-of-way application that had been killed, and they wanted to know why. And they had heard that a bureau employee had been out there making claims, and their lawyers spent 2 days trying to establish that I was the source of an unfounded environmental allegation that had cost their client 11 months and several $1 million. I sat in a conference room in Reno in March of 2010, and I answered their questions as narrowly as I could, and when they asked me directly what I believed had happened to Mr. Pine, I said that I did not know, which was true. It is still true. Warren Tice did not appear at the deposition, but the hold on the application, which had come from a level nobody could name, was never lifted for the northern parcels, and the company redesigned, and no lawyer ever asked me another question. I need to account for the following years quickly, because they are mostly the ordinary sadness of a person who has had something happen to her. I stayed with the Bureau until 2016 and retired at 58, 3 years earlier than I had planned, with a smaller pension than I would have had. I was competent and quiet in Winnemucca, and I did not talk about Pale Horse. Twice, at trainings, somebody who had heard something asked me about it, and both times I said that a friend of mine had died in a search and rescue situation, and that I would rather not, and both times they were decent about it. Hollis was declared dead in 2016 on a court order. He had a daughter in Boise who I had never met, and who was kind to me on the phone and who did not want the notebooks, so I have them. 41 field notebooks, 1979 to 2009, in a footlocker in my hall closet. The last entry is 9:22 a.m., November 14th, 2009. It is in his handwriting, and it is perfectly legible, and it says, Sage and band below, gap-oriented SSE approx 15 to green. Band approx 200 YD wide, continuous N and S as far as visible. Mortality along both margins, not within band. Not a kill. Margin effect. Whatever moves in the band, the ones on the edge get the shoulder of it, and then below that, in the same steady hand. This is the 4th one in my lifetime, and I have written it down 4 times. Dorcas Weems died in 2013 at 85 in the house, which is what she wanted. I drove out and sat with her twice in her last year. The second time, she told me one more thing, and I have never been able to decide what to do with it, so I am putting it here without comment. She said that in October of 1961, when she was 33, she and her father had gone out at dawn to move cattle, and the cattle were already gone through the fence, and on the way back, they had passed a place on the flat where the brush was pale, and there had been a man standing in it. She said he was maybe 200 yards off, standing in the middle of the pale band, facing north, and that her father had stopped the truck and had not gotten out. She said she asked her father if they should go and see about him, and her father said no. She said they drove home and it was never spoken of again, and she did not know, then or later, whether the man was somebody from town or a stranger or anything at all. She said, he wasn't moving, but he wasn't standing still either. He was going somewhere. He just wasn't going anywhere we could see. Elias Kohut died in 2012 in Grand Junction. I know because I called the number in 2013 and his daughter answered. She said he had left a box for me. He had never met me and had spoken to me on the telephone 3 times in 2009, and he had put my name on a box. It was strip chart records. Photocopies. He had never had the originals. He had made copies in 1979 knowing what was going to happen to the files. Of the 4 Pale Horse monitoring wells, 1972 to 1980, with the events circled in red pencil and dated in the margins in his handwriting. There are 5 events in 8 years of record. October 1976, November 1977, October 1978. There is a gap of a year. Then November 1980, 2 months before the wells were plugged, and one in September 1974 that he had circled twice and annotated anomalous, N to S as usual, but returns 3 weeks later, S to N, slower. Only bidirectional event in record. Note, 1974 is the only year of record with heavy sept precip. I do not know what that means. I have spent years not knowing what it means. But I think about the phrase it has a season, and I think about the fact that things with seasons go somewhere and then come back. And I think about the way that every animal in that basin runs southeast, always southeast, out the low end. And I wonder what the ones on the southeast side do, in the years when it comes back. I live in Winnemucca now, in my mother's house, which I inherited. I am 68. My sister is 2 hours away and calls on Sundays. Here is why I am finally putting this on paper. 2 things happened this spring. The first is that in March, a man was found walking on the shoulder of US 93 north of Wells, Nevada, disoriented, uninjured, unable to say his name. He was in his 40s. The story ran for 3 days, and then he was identified as a man who had walked away from a care facility in Utah with a documented history, and it was nothing. And I read every version of that story 4 times, and I called the sheriff's office in Elko like a crazy woman, and it was nothing. But I sat in my kitchen with the phone in my hand afterward, and I understood something about myself, which is that I have been waiting for 16 years for a man to be found walking on a highway, and that I am going to keep waiting, and that this is not a healthy way for a person to spend the end of her life. Writing it down is the only thing I have not tried. The second thing is worse. In February, a project was announced in the Big Smoky Valley, 300 miles south of Pale Horse. Not solar this time. A transmission line, a big one, 500 kilovolt, part of a regional interconnection, running north-northwest to south-southeast down the length of that valley. I looked up the route. I looked up the 1971 Category 3 allocation in that field office's plan, which is still there, because those allocations are still there, all 4 of them, sitting in the plans like fossils. The line crosses it at an oblique angle for about 9 miles. I wrote a letter during the public comment period. I identified myself as a retired bureau employee with 28 years of service, and I confined myself to what could be documented: the existence of the allocation, the 1971 classification, the absence of Appendix K, the 1979 Kohut letter, which I attached, and the 1968 survey crew, and I asked that the alignment be shifted east. I got a form response thanking me for my comment and stating that the identified allocation had been reviewed and that no conflict was identified because the allocation restricted authorized surface use, and the transmission line would be an authorized use subject to a plan amendment, which was being processed. A plan amendment. 38 years of a line on a map that worked because nobody looked at it, and the way it ends is not a conspiracy and not a betrayal. The way it ends is that somebody amends the plan because the reason for the line was never written down, and a reason that was never written down cannot survive contact with a process. Warren Tice's generation kept it by not being curious. Mine broke it by being curious. The next one will break it by being efficient. I have one more thing to tell you, and then I am finished. In October of last year, I drove back. I want to be honest that I had been planning it for 2 years, and that I told my sister I was going to Elko for a funeral. I did not go into the basin. I want that clear. I went to the saddle above the Weems place, which is high ground on the southeast rim, outside the strip, and I parked, and I sat on the hood of my truck with Hollis's binoculars, which I still use, and I looked north up 31 miles of empty Nevada in the early light. The Weems place is gone, by the way. The house burned in 2019 after Dorcas's estate sold it, and nobody rebuilt. There is a haul road at the north end now that was not there in 2009, serving a mineral exploration lease outside the strip, and there was a light on it at that hour, some outfit's pickup with its headlights on, 11 miles away. I sat there for about an hour and I did not feel anything. No pressure, no weight, no attention. It was a cold, ordinary, beautiful basin full of nothing, and there were ravens. And then, at about 6:45, on the flat below me, 30 or 40 pronghorn that had been grazing in the rabbit brush since before I got there, stopped eating. All of them, at the same instant. Not a ripple, not a spread. Heads up, bodies turned, all facing north-northwest. I did not wait to see what they did. I got in my truck and I drove southeast out of Pale Horse Basin at 50 miles an hour on a road rated for 25. And I did not stop until I was on pavement, and I want to tell you that I felt foolish afterward. And I did, for about 10 minutes. And then I felt something I have not felt since I was 51 years old, which is that I had gotten a thing right. Because that is the whole of what I know. That is the entire content of 16 years and 11 pages of notes and 4 field notebooks and a sack of drill cuttings in the garage. I do not know what moves down that basin. I do not know if it is alive, if alive is even a category that applies. I do not know if it is one thing that returns or a condition the ground enters. I do not know where it goes at the southeast end, and I have never had the courage to find out whether the strip continues under the Curry Divide, though I could get that from a map in an afternoon, and I have not, and I know exactly what that says about me. I do not know if it means us harm. I think, if I am honest, that it does not, that it has no opinion of us at all, that it is not a predator and not a hunter, that it is a large, slow fact moving through the world on a schedule that was set before there was anyone to consult, and that the deer along the margins and the survey crew in 1968 and Hollis at the base of the Sawmill Gap were not taken. They were in the way. But I know the one thing, and I have earned it, and it is the only thing I have to give anybody. The animals in that country have a warning system that is older than our species, and it is not for us, and it does not care whether we believe it, and it has never once been wrong. It does not require you to understand it. It does not require you to have a theory. It requires exactly one thing of you, and Hollis Pine knew it for 30 years and said it out loud one time, 4 minutes before it stopped mattering for him. And it took me until I was 67 years old and sitting on the hood of a truck on a cold morning to finally do it without arguing. When the animals run, you run too. You do not stop to take a photograph. You do not go up on the ridge to get a better angle. You do not tell yourself that you are the one out here with the training. You go the way they are going, and you go now, and you find out what it was afterward from a long way off, if you find out at all. That is the whole job. It was always the whole job. I am going to mail this to 3 people and put a copy in the footlocker with the notebooks. And then I am going to go sit on the porch, because it is October, and there are antelope on the flat east of this town, and I have gotten into the habit of watching them. They have been calm all week. The morning fog clung to the ancient trees like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their grip on the Salagi National Forest. I inhaled deeply, the scent of pine and damp earth filling my lungs as I stood on the weathered porch of my ranger station. My name is Kanadi Awiakta, descended from a long line of Cherokee forest guardians. My people had been the protectors of these woods for centuries before the government gave it a formal designation and hired people like me to watch over it. Another day in paradise, I murmured to myself, scanning the tree line that marked the beginning of my domain. Paradise to some, perhaps, but I knew better. These woods held secrets in their shadows, whispers in their rustling leaves that few could understand. My grandmother, before she passed, told me stories of the ancient beings that dwelled in these forests. The Nunnehi, she would say, the immortals who walk between worlds. As a child, I believed her. As a man of 35 with 15 years as a park ranger, I'd come to understand that the forest held dangers more tangible than spirits, lost hikers, flash floods, territorial black bears. The radio crackled to life on my belt. "Kanadi, you copy?" It was Meredith from dispatch. "I copy. What's up, Mayor?" "Got a call about some missing hikers, group of college students from the university. They were supposed to return yesterday from a weekend camping trip near Whispering Creek. Their families reported them missing this morning." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Whispering Creek was in the deepest part of the forest, where the trees grew so thick they blocked out the sun and the terrain was treacherous even for experienced hikers. "How many?" "4. 2 men, 2 women, all around 20 years old. Send me their details and last known coordinates. I'll head out right away." I went inside to gather my gear. Backpack with first aid supplies, extra water, emergency rations, flashlight, compass, map, and my trusty rifle. The weight of the weapon was reassuring against my shoulder. I rarely needed to use it, but the forest had taught me to always be prepared. Black bears were common in these parts, and the occasional mountain lion wasn't unheard of. As I loaded my gear into the Forest Service Jeep, a movement at the forest's edge caught my eye. I paused, squinting through the morning mist. For a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw a tall, dark figure standing between 2 ancient oaks. My heart skipped a beat, and I blinked. When I looked again, nothing was there but swirling mist. The drive to Whispering Creek trailhead took nearly an hour on winding dirt roads. As I drove deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around me, branches reaching across the road like grasping hands. I'd made this drive hundreds of times, but today felt different. The forest seemed watchful, alert to my presence in a way I've never experienced before. I parked at the trailhead and rechecked my gear before setting out. The missing hiker's last known location was approximately 5 miles in, near a series of limestone caves that were popular with more adventurous visitors. If they had stuck to the trail, I might find them before nightfall. If they had wandered off path, well, the forest was vast and daylight was limited. The trail was muddy from recent rains, which made tracking easier. I found fresh footprints, hiking boots, 4 distinct patterns, heading into the forest. Good. They had at least started on the correct path. I followed the prints, moving at a steady pace, alert for any signs of distress or deviation from the trail. 3 miles in, I noticed something odd. The footprints suddenly scattered as if the group had panicked and run in different directions. I crouched down, examining the disturbed earth. Among the boot prints were other impressions, large, barefoot-like marks that were nearly twice the size of my own feet. My breath caught in my throat. I'd seen prints like these before, deep in the backcountry where few people ventured, but never this clear, never this fresh. "Hello?" I called out. "Park Ranger, is anyone there?" My voice echoed through the trees and was swallowed by the silence of the forest. No response came. I stood, my hand instinctively moving to the rifle on my shoulder. The prints led off the trail into the denser part of the forest. I hesitated only briefly before following them. If the hikers had run that way, I needed to find them before nightfall, before whatever had scared them found them again. The undergrowth thickened as I moved away from the established trail. Branches clawed at my clothes and shadows deepened despite the midday sun. I followed the chaotic trail of footprints, the smaller human prints running, stumbling, the larger prints following at an unhurried pace, like a predator confident in catching its prey. I found the first sign of the missing hikers an hour later. A discarded backpack caught on a fallen log. The pack was torn, its contents scattered across the forest floor. I knelt to examine it, noting the university logo emblazoned on the front. Inside was a wallet with an ID card. Michael Chen, I read aloud, one of our missing hikers. As I stood, a sound broke the forest's silence. A high, keening wail that was neither animal nor human. It echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt a primal fear that I hadn't experienced since I was a child. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. When you hear the cry of the Nunahi, do not run. Stand your ground, for they respect courage above all else. I gripped my rifle tighter and called out again. This is Park Ranger Awiakta. If anyone can hear me, respond. The forest fell silent once more. Then, from somewhere ahead, I heard a faint human voice. Help! Please, someone help us! I moved quickly toward the sound, pushing through dense underbrush until I emerged in a small clearing. There, huddled against a massive oak tree, were two of the missing hikers, a young man and woman, their faces pale with fear, clothes torn and dirty. Park Ranger, I said, approaching slowly to avoid startling them. Are you hurt? The woman sobbed with relief, but the man just stared at me with wide, shocked eyes. It took them, he whispered. It took Mike and Jen. What took them? I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. A monster, the woman said between sobs. A giant, hairy monster. We were setting up camp when we heard something moving in the trees. Mike went to check and he screamed. We all ran, but it caught up to Mike and Jen. We've been hiding here since yesterday. I helped them to their feet, introduced myself, and learned their names, Tyler and Ashley. They were dehydrated and scratched up, but otherwise unharmed. I gave them water and energy bars from my pack while asking questions about their missing friends. Which way did it take them? I asked. Tyler pointed deeper into the forest. That way, toward the caves. I nodded. I need to get you two back to safety. Then I'll organize a search party for your friends. No, Ashley grabbed my arm. You don't understand. That thing, it wasn't human. It was huge, covered in dark hair. It moved so fast. Bigfoot, Tyler said, his voice hollow. It was Bigfoot. I know how that sounds, but I saw it clearly. At least 8 feet tall, walking upright, but wrong somehow, like its joints bent differently. I didn't dismiss their claim outright. I've heard too many similar stories over the years, seen too many unexplained tracks in the deep forest. Let's focus on getting you to safety first, I said firmly. Then we'll find your friends. As we prepared to leave, that eerie wail echoed through the forest again, closer this time. Tyler and Ashley froze in terror. Move, I ordered, pushing them ahead of me. Back to the trail. Now. We moved as quickly as possible through the dense forest, the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush behind us spurring us on. When we finally reached the main trail, I risked a glance back. For just a moment, standing between two ancient trees, I saw it. A massive, dark figure, too tall and broad to be human. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows of the forest as if it had never been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. And I knew that somewhere in the depths of the Tsalagi forest, two young people were in the clutches of something ancient and deadly. Something that my grandmother's stories had warned about. Something that had walked these woods long before humans had given them a name. I ushered Tyler and Ashley toward the trailhead, my mind racing. I would get them to safety, then return with reinforcements. But deep down, I knew this was my responsibility. As a forest ranger, yes, but more importantly, as a Cherokee, a guardian of the ancient pact between my people and the forest. The creature had taken 2 souls into its domain, and one way or another I was going to get them back. The sheriff's department incident room buzzed with activity as I finished briefing the search teams. Maps were spread across tables, radio channels assigned, and areas of responsibility divided among the volunteers. Outside, the afternoon sun was already dipping toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Remember, stay in radio contact at all times, Sheriff Donovan emphasized, his weathered face grave. These mountains get dangerous after dark. If you haven't found any sign of the missing hikers by sundown, we regroup and continue at first light. I stood silently at the back of the room, watching the preparations. Tyler and Ashley had been taken to the hospital for examination, both still in shock from their ordeal. Their descriptions of what had taken their friends had been dismissed by most of the search party as panic-induced hallucinations, but I knew better. Kanati, Sheriff Donovan approached me after dismissing the teams. You've been quiet. Something on your mind? I chose my words carefully. Those caves near Whispering Creek, they go deep into the mountain. If the missing hikers sought shelter there. Donovan nodded. I've assigned Team 3 to check them out. They've got climbing gear and spelunking experience. I'd like to join them, I said. The sheriff studied me, his pale blue eyes narrowing slightly. You think there's something you're not telling me, Awiakta? I met his gaze steadily. Just a feeling. I know these woods better than most. That you do, he conceded. All right, join Team 3. But remember, this is a search and rescue operation, not a solo mission. Work with your team. I nodded, though we both knew I would do what I thought necessary once in the forest. Sheriff Donovan and I had an understanding born of years working together. He respected my knowledge of the forest and my Cherokee heritage, even if he didn't always understand it. As the teams dispersed to their vehicles, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find my colleague, Ranger Davis, her expression concerned. Those kids said it was Bigfoot, she said quietly. The sheriff thinks they were hallucinating from fear and dehydration, but you don't, do you? I glanced around to ensure no one was listening. My grandmother called it Sul Kalu, the slant-eyed giant, the keeper of the game in the Cherokee stories, a hunter who takes those who disrespect the forest. Davis raised an eyebrow. You believe those legends? I believe these mountains hold secrets older than any of us, I replied, and I believe something took those kids. Whether you want to call it Bigfoot, Sul Kalu, or something else entirely, doesn't much matter to me. What matters is finding those missing hikers before it's too late. She nodded slowly. Be careful out there, Kanati. Whatever it is, it's on its home turf. The drive back to Whispering Creek was tense. The Forest Service truck filled with 4 volunteers from Team 3, all experienced outdoorsmen who had participated in rescue operations before. None of them mentioned the Bigfoot angle, instead focusing on practical matters, the weather forecast, terrain challenges, possible scenarios for where the missing hikers might have sought shelter. We reached the trailhead as the late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. The mood was somber as we geared up. Each man carried a backpack with survival equipment, first aid supplies, and enough provisions for an overnight stay if necessary. Radios were checked, weapons secured, standard-issue sidearms for protection against wildlife. We follow the main trail to where Ranger Awiakta found the first 2 hikers, said Marcus, the team leader. From there, we track toward the cave system. Stay within visual contact at all times. The forest seemed different now, watchful and alive in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. As we hiked, I found myself repeatedly glancing into the deep shadows between the trees, feeling eyes upon us. We reached the clearing where I had found Tyler and Ashley in good time. The team spread out, looking for signs of the other 2 hikers or what had taken them. Tracks here, called Jonas, the team's best tracker. We gathered around where he knelt, examining the forest floor. Multiple sets, 2 small, probably your hikers, and something else. He pointed to a large, barefoot-like impression in the soft earth. Something big. Bear? Suggested Marcus, though his tone indicated he didn't believe it himself. Jonas shook his head. Bears don't walk bipedally for extended periods. These tracks show consistent bipedal movement. And look at the stride length. Whatever made these was tall, over 7 feet at least. The team exchanged uneasy glances. No one wanted to say the word Bigfoot, but it hung in the air between us. The tracks lead this way, I said, pointing toward the deeper forest. Toward the caves, just like the survivors said. Marcus nodded grimly. Let's move. Daylight's burning. We followed the tracks through increasingly difficult terrain, the forest growing denser, the undergrowth more tangled. The ancient trees loomed overhead, their branches intertwining to block out much of the fading sunlight. These woods don't feel right, muttered Rodriguez, the youngest of our team. Too quiet. He was right. The usual forest sounds, birds, insects, small animals rustling in the underbrush, were absent. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our own movements and breathing. As we approached the cave system, the tracks became clearer in the soft earth near the entrance. The creature had definitely brought its captives here. Large, flat stones surrounded the cave mouth, some bearing faded pictographs that I recognized as ancient Cherokee symbols. Warnings about the boundary between the world of humans and the realm of spirits. We should radio our position, said Marcus, reaching for his handset. He frowned. That's strange. No signal. The others checked their radios with the same result. The devices were functioning, but something was blocking transmission. Could be the rock formations, suggested Jonas, though he didn't sound convinced. We need to continue, I said firmly. Those hikers have been missing for over 24 hours now. If they're injured... Marcus nodded reluctantly. All right, standard cave exploration protocol. Headlamps on, stay together. We go in, do a quick sweep, and if we don't find anything, we come back with proper caving equipment tomorrow. We activated our headlamps and entered the cave mouth in single file. The temperature dropped immediately, the air becoming damp and heavy with the smell of wet stone and something else. A musky animal odor that made my nostrils flare. The main passage descended gradually, wide enough for us to walk two abreast. Our headlamps cast eerie shadows on the limestone walls, illuminating more pictographs, hunting scenes, spirit figures, and repeated images of a tall, slender figure with elongated limbs. Anyone recognize these symbols? Asked Rodriguez, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Cherokee, I replied quietly. Ancient hunting rituals and warnings about the forest guardian, Tsul Kalu. The what now? Marcus looked back at me. The slant-eyed giant. A powerful spirit that protects the forest and its creatures. The stories say he takes those who violate the sacred laws of the wilderness. Jonas snorted softly. No offense to your heritage, Kanadi, but we're looking for missing hikers, not spirit monsters. I didn't respond. The deeper we went into the cave, the stronger my sense of unease grew. This was a sacred place, a boundary between worlds according to my grandmother's teachings. We were trespassers here. The passage widened into a large chamber with a high ceiling lost in darkness above our headlamp beams. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing oddly. The ground was littered with bones, mostly animal, but some disturbingly human-like. Jesus, whispered Rodriguez. What is this place? Before anyone could answer, a low, rumbling growl echoed through the chamber. We froze, headlamps swinging wildly as we searched for the source. Hello? Marcus called out. This is search and rescue. If you can hear us, call out. Silence answered him, then another growl, closer this time, with a distinctly threatening tone. We should leave, Jonas said tersely. Whatever that is. A scream cut him off, human female coming from a passage on the far side of the chamber. Without hesitation, I moved toward it, my hand on my sidearm. Kanadi, wait, Marcus hissed, but I was already halfway across the chamber. The others followed reluctantly, our headlamps creating a confusing maze of light and shadow. The female voice called again, weaker this time. Help. Please. We entered the side passage, moving as quickly as caution allowed. The tunnel twisted and turned, descending deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, damper, the musky animal smell stronger. The passage opened into a smaller chamber, and our headlamps illuminated a horrific scene. One of the missing hikers, a young woman who must have been Jen, lay huddled against the wall, her clothes torn and dirty, face streaked with tears and grime. Of Mike, there was no sign. "Park rangers?" I said gently, approaching her with my hands visible. "We're here to help you." Her eyes widened with fear, not relief. "Run," she whispered. "It's still here. It's watching us." As if summoned by her words, a massive shadow detached itself from the darkness of the far corner. Our headlamps caught glimpses of matted dark hair, powerful limbs, and a face that was almost, but not quite, human. Eyes reflected the light like a nocturnal animal's, and when it opened its mouth, it revealed teeth designed for tearing flesh. It stood fully upright, towering over us at what must have been 8 feet tall. Its body was powerfully built, covered in dark hair, but with an intelligence in its eyes that no mere animal possessed. "Don't move," I said quietly to the team. "Don't run, don't show fear." The creature, Tzulkalu, Bigfoot, whatever name you gave it, tilted its head slightly, studying us with unsettling focus. It made a sound low in its throat, not quite a growl, more like an attempt at communication. I remembered my grandmother's teachings and slowly raised my empty right hand, palm forward, while placing my left hand over my heart, the traditional Cherokee greeting of peace. "We mean no harm," I said in Cherokee, the ancient words feeling right in this ancient place. "We have come for the lost ones." The creature's eyes fixed on me, recognition flickering in their depths. It took a step forward, causing the rest of the team to tense, hands moving toward weapons. I gestured for them to stay still. "The girl," I continued in Cherokee, "she must return with us. She does not belong in your world." For a long moment, the creature stood motionless. Then, with deliberate slowness, it stepped back, moving away from Jen, granting silent permission. "Marcus," I said quietly in English, "get the girl. Move slowly, no sudden movements." Marcus inched forward, helping Jen to her feet. She was weak but able to stand with support. "Where's Mike?" Jonas asked her softly. She shook her head, fresh tears flowing. "It took him deeper in. I heard him screaming then. Nothing." The creature watched us, its massive form blocking the passage that presumably led deeper into the cave system. It made no move to stop us from taking Jen, but it was clear it would not allow us to proceed further. "We need to leave," I said firmly. "Now. We'll come back for Mike." "We can't just leave him," Rodriguez protested. The creature growled at the raised voice, a rumbling sound that vibrated in my chest. "We don't have a choice," I replied. "Not now. Not without risking everyone." With extreme caution, we backed out of the chamber, supporting Jen between us. The creature followed at a distance, ensuring our retreat, but not threatening us directly. Its eyes remained fixed on me, communicating. The rescue team's mood was somber as we made our way back to the command post with Jen. She drifted in and out of consciousness, traumatized by her ordeal. The forest around us seemed alive with whispers and shadows, the darkness between the trees concealing watchful eyes. I could feel it, the creature following us at a distance, ensuring we left its territory but made no attempt to venture deeper again. "What the hell was that thing?" Marcus finally asked, breaking the tense silence. "You know what it was," I replied quietly. "The same thing people have been reporting in these mountains for generations." "Bigfoot isn't real," Jonas insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "There's got to be a rational explanation." "You saw it with your own eyes," I said. "Sometimes the rational explanation is that we don't know everything about this world. My people have known about Tzulkalu for centuries." "Whatever it was, it still has Mike," Rodriguez reminded us, "and we're leaving him behind." The weight of that truth hung heavy over us. We had made the only choice we could under the circumstances, but abandoning a search was against everything we stood for as rescuers. When we reached the command post, Sheriff Donovan's relief at finding Jen quickly gave way to concern when he learned Mike was still missing and what we had encountered in the cave. "Bigfoot?" he repeated incredulously after I finished my report. We stood apart from the others, speaking in low tones while the medics attended to Jen. "Kanati, I respect you, but that's a hell of a claim to put in an official report." "Call it whatever you want," I replied. "But there's something in those caves that walks on two legs, stands over 7 feet tall, and has intelligence behind its eyes. And it has one of our missing hikers." Donovan ran a hand over his face. "What do you suggest we do? I can't send a team in there to confront whatever it is, without putting them at serious risk." "I'll go back," I said. "Alone." "Absolutely not. That's suicide." "It let us take Jen. It could have killed all of us in that cave, but it didn't. It was communicating, in its way. I think it responded to me because of my Cherokee heritage, the connection to the land." Donovan studied me, concern evident in his weathered face. "You really believe that?" "I do. And I believe I can find Mike and bring him out alive. But I need to go back tonight, while I can still track the creature. And I need to go alone." After much argument, Donovan reluctantly agreed to let me return to the cave system, but with conditions. I would carry a satellite phone with GPS tracking, check in every hour, and withdraw immediately if I encountered serious danger. A backup team would remain on standby at the trailhead. I prepared quickly, selecting essential gear for cave exploration and survival. As I loaded my backpack, Davis approached me. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. I smiled grimly. "Yes, I do." "You saw how it reacted to a group. It was defensive, territorial. But it recognized something in me. A connection to this place that goes back generations. My grandmother used to say that the Cherokee and Sul Kalu share guardianship of these mountains. Maybe there's truth in that." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Davis said. "Just come back, okay? These mountains need their modern guardian too." The return hike to the cave was faster without the full team, though darkness made navigation challenging. The forest felt different at night, more alive, more aware. I moved with deliberate respect, occasionally murmuring Cherokee words of greeting and purpose to the watching darkness. When I reached the cave entrance, I paused to make my first check-in call, knowing it might be my last if the cave depths blocked the signal. Then, with a deep breath, I activated my headlamp and entered the limestone passage. The air inside was thick with moisture and that distinctive musky scent. I moved carefully, following the path we had taken earlier. The pictographs on the walls seemed to shift and move in my headlamp's beam, ancient stories coming alive in the dancing light. I reached the main chamber with its disturbing collection of bones. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant drip of water and my own breathing. I paused, turning off my headlamp to let my eyes adjust to the darkness. Far deeper in the cave, a faint bioluminescent glow provided minimal illumination, some type of fungus growing on the walls, perhaps. "I have returned," I said in Cherokee, my voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "I seek the lost one. I come with respect for the guardian of this place." Something shifted in the darkness, a presence, massive and silent. I felt it before I saw it, that crawling sensation of being watched by ancient eyes. I stood my ground, resisting the instinct to flee or reach for my weapon. The creature emerged from a passage I hadn't noticed before, moving with surprising grace for its size. In the dim phosphorescent light, its features were clearer than before. A face with a pronounced brow ridge, deep-set eyes that reflected light like a nocturnal predator's, a powerful jaw, and a body covered in dark hair. It walked upright, but with a slight stoop, its long arms hanging at its sides. It stopped several yards away, studying me with unmistakable intelligence. Then it made a series of sounds, grunts and clicks that had pattern and purpose. "I don't understand your words," I said in Cherokee, "but I understand your claim to this place. I seek only the lost human who was taken. He does not belong in your world." The creature tilted its head, then turned and moved back toward the passage it had emerged from. After a few steps it paused, looking back at me expectantly. It wanted me to follow. I activated my headlamp again and did so, keeping a respectful distance. The passage descended steeply, requiring careful footing on the slick limestone. The air grew warmer, more humid, suggesting we were approaching an underground water source. The passage opened into a vast cavern that took my breath away. A subterranean river flowed through its center, the water glowing faintly blue from bioluminescent organisms. The ceiling soared above, adorned with spectacular stalactites. Along the walls, more pictographs depicted hunting scenes, celestial events, and the recurring image of the forest guardian. But what truly stunned me was the evidence of habitation. Crude tools made from stone and bone, sleeping areas lined with dried vegetation, even primitive containers fashioned from hollowed wood. This wasn't just a lair, it was a dwelling, a home. And there were others, smaller, but similar creatures moving in the shadows at the edges of the cavern. A community, a family group. The creature led me to a side chamber where Mike lay on a bed of leaves and moss. He was unconscious but breathing, his body covered with a crude blanket of woven plant fibers. A gash on his forehead had been packed with a poultice of what looked like chewed herbs. "They're treating him?" I whispered in disbelief. The lead creature, I couldn't help but think of it as the alpha, made more of those patterned sounds. It gestured to Mike, then to the exit, clearly communicating that I could take him. As I knelt to check Mike's condition, I noticed something I had missed before, a wooden staff leaning against the wall nearby. It was intricately carved with Cherokee symbols, some so ancient I barely recognized them. The wood was old, weathered, but well preserved in the constant temperature of the cave. The alpha creature noticed my attention and picked up the staff. With deliberate movements, it extended it toward me. "You want me to take this?" I asked, puzzled. The creature made an affirmative sound. I accepted the staff, feeling the weight of its age and significance. As my fingers closed around the wood, a strange sensation washed over me, a connection to this place, to the land above, to generations of my ancestors who had walked these forests and known of these beings. "Wado," I said, "thank you" in Cherokee. The creature nodded once, then pointed to Mike in the exit passage. "Message received. Take him and go." I carefully lifted Mike, who stirred but didn't wake. He was lighter than I expected, dehydrated from his ordeal. As I prepared to leave, the alpha creature made one final communication. It touched its chest, then mine, then gestured to the forest above. The meaning seemed clear. We share guardianship of the land. We are connected. I nodded in understanding, then began the difficult task of carrying Mike back through the cave system. The creatures didn't follow, but I felt their awareness of me. Not threatening, but watchful, evaluating. The journey out was arduous. Mike remained unconscious, though he occasionally mumbled incoherently. By the time I emerged from the cave into the pre-dawn forest, my muscles were burning with exertion. I activated the satellite phone, relieved to find it had signal again. "Donovan, it's Awiakta. I have him. Mike's alive. We're coming out." The extraction team met us halfway to the trailhead. As they took over Mike's care, one of the medics asked, "What happened to him?" I looked back toward the depths of the forest where ancient secrets remained hidden. "He encountered something few people ever see," I replied, "and survived to tell about it." The staff the creature had given me was secured to my backpack. I could feel its weight, its significance, a token of recognition between guardians, a reminder that the forest had secrets worth protecting. As we made our way back to civilization, I knew that my understanding of these mountains, and my role in them, had forever changed. The boundary between legend and reality had blurred, and I now stood as a bridge between two worlds. Mike would recover, the forest would keep its secrets, and I would return to my duties as a ranger, with new awareness of exactly what, and who, I was protecting. 2 weeks after the rescue, life at Salagi National Forest had returned to a semblance of normalcy. The media frenzy following the hikers' rescue had gradually subsided, their story becoming just another mysterious incident in the forest's long history. Mike had been hospitalized for several days but was recovering well physically, though he remembered little of his time in the caves. The official report cited an unidentified predator and traumatic stress response to explain the hikers' accounts of a Bigfoot-like creature. I had said little during the debriefings, providing only the essential facts while omitting my communication with the creature and the gift of the ancient staff. Some truths weren't meant for official reports or news headlines. The staff now stood in the corner of my cabin, its presence a constant reminder of what I had witnessed. In quiet evenings, I studied its intricate carvings, recognizing ancient Cherokee symbols for balance, protection, and harmony with nature. Other markings were older, unknown to me, perhaps from a time before human memory. On this particular morning, I sat on my cabin porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun's first rays filter through the forest canopy. My radio crackled with routine communications between rangers and the visitor center, but my mind was elsewhere. Since the cave incident, I had felt a deepening connection to the forest, subtle changes in my awareness like being able to sense approaching weather before any visible signs, or knowing when animals were nearby without seeing or hearing them. Davis's truck pulled up, interrupting my thoughts. She climbed out carrying a folder of paperwork and a cardboard tray with 2 fresh coffees. "Thought you might need a refill," she said, nodding at my nearly empty cup. "And some human interaction you've been keeping to yourself lately?" I accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Just been thinking. About the caves, about what you saw down there." She settled into the chair beside mine, her expression concerned. "You never did tell the full story, did you?" I took a long sip before answering. "Would you have believed me if I had? Try me." I considered her for a moment. Davis was practical, science-minded, but open to the mysteries of the natural world. If anyone might understand, it would be her. "The creature, Tzul'kalu, it wasn't just some animal," I began. "It was intelligent, communicated with purpose, and it wasn't alone. There was a whole community down there. They've been living in those caves for who knows how long, watching us, staying hidden." Davis listened without interruption as I described the underground dwelling, the careful treatment of Mike, and the gift of the staff. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "You know how this sounds," she finally said. "I do. That's why it didn't go in my report. Yet you're telling me." I smiled faintly. "Someone should know the truth. For the records that don't make it into official files." She nodded slowly. "So what now? You just go back to being a regular park ranger after discovering a what? A relict hominid species? A supernatural guardian of the forest? Does it matter what label we put on it? The forest has its secrets, always has. My job is the same, protect this place and those who visit it." "And what about them? These creatures? Do you think they'll stay hidden after this encounter?" The question had been weighing on me. "I don't know. Something's changing. They allowed themselves to be seen, not just by me, but by the rescue team. That's unprecedented." Before Davis could respond, my radio crackled again, this time with an urgent message. "Ranger Awiakta, do you copy? We've got reports of unauthorized activity near the restricted zone in Sector 7. Possible poachers." I grabbed the radio. "Copy that. Details?" "Park visitor reported hearing gunshots and seeing a vehicle parked off the service road near Bear Creek. Forest service truck, but not one of ours." I frowned. Sector 7 bordered the area where we had encountered the creature, remote backcountry rarely visited by tourists. "I'm heading out there now," I replied. "Send coordinates to my GPS." Davis was already standing. "I'm coming with you." "This could be connected to what happened in the caves," I said quietly as we gathered our gear. "If someone's hunting in that area." She nodded grimly. "Then your forest guardians might be in danger." We took my Jeep, following the winding service road as far as we could before continuing on foot. The forest felt tense, watchful, the usual bird calls absent, the air unnaturally still. My hand rested instinctively on the butt of my service pistol as we moved through the dense undergrowth. "There," Davis whispered, pointing through a break in the trees. A white truck with fake Forest Service markings was parked in a small clearing. No one was visible nearby, but equipment had been unloaded. Heavy-duty traps, tranquilizer guns, and high-powered rifles that no legitimate forest ranger would carry. "Poachers," I muttered. "But not for deer or bear." Davis nodded. "They're hunting your Bigfoot." We approached cautiously, listening for voices or movement. The truck was empty, its doors unlocked. Inside, I found maps marked with locations of reported sightings and a satellite phone with recent calls to a number with an international area code. "Someone's funding this," Davis said, examining a high-tech camera with thermal imaging capabilities. "This isn't local hunters looking for trophies." A gunshot echoed through the forest, followed by shouts. We moved immediately toward the sound, staying low and using the trees for cover. As we crested a small ridge, we saw them, 3 men in camouflage gear surrounding something large and dark that lay motionless on the forest floor. My heart clenched. Even from this distance, I could recognize the form of one of the creatures from the cave, smaller than the alpha, perhaps a juvenile or female. It wasn't moving. "We got one," one of the men was saying excitedly into a satellite phone. "Tranquilized it. Looks female. Exactly as described. Over 6 feet tall, bipedal primate, unknown species. We'll secure it for transport." "Federal wildlife officers," Davis called out, her weapon drawn. "Drop your weapons and step away from the animal." The men spun toward us, momentarily startled. Then 2 of them raised their rifles. "Take cover," I shouted, pulling Davis behind a large oak as bullets splintered the bark. "We don't want trouble," one of the men called out. "We're legitimate researchers." "Legitimate researchers don't shoot at federal officers," I shouted back. "Drop your weapons and we can talk." Instead, I heard them moving quickly, dragging something heavy. They were trying to load the creature into their vehicle. I glanced at Davis. "We need to stop them from taking it." She nodded grimly. "I'll circle left, try to flank them." As she moved away, I took a deep breath and focused on the forest around me. Something was different. A tension in the air, a feeling of gathering presence. The trees seemed to whisper warnings, the wind carrying messages I couldn't quite understand but instinctively felt. They weren't alone. We weren't alone. I moved right, using the trees for cover, making my way toward the poacher's truck. I could hear them struggling with the weight of the unconscious creature, cursing as they tried to lift it into the vehicle's bed. "Hurry up," one hissed. "More rangers could be coming." "This thing weighs a ton," another complained. "And where the hell is Johnson?" I peered around a large pine and saw 2 of the men had managed to half-load the tranquilized creature into their truck. The 3rd man was nowhere to be seen. The creature's limbs hung limply over the tailgate, its chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I was about to move closer when a blood-curdling scream tore through the forest, coming from somewhere to my left, where Davis had gone. The poachers froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. "Johnson?" one called out uncertainly. Another scream answered, cut off abruptly. Then silence. "What the hell was that?" one of the poachers whispered, raising his rifle and scanning the trees. I knew what it was. The creatures had come for their own. A massive dark form dropped from the canopy above the truck, landing with surprising lightness despite its bulk. The alpha stood there over 7 feet of primal power, its eyes reflecting cold intelligence and fury. The poachers stumbled back, their expressions shifting from shock to terror. "Shoot it!" one screamed, raising his rifle. Before he could fire, the alpha moved with blinding speed, swatting the weapon away and seizing the man by the throat. The other poacher turned to run, only to find his path blocked by 2 more creatures emerging from the forest shadows. I stepped into the clearing, weapon drawn but pointed downward. "Stop!" I called out in English, then repeated in Cherokee. "No more violence." The alpha's head turned toward me, recognition flickering in its eyes. It still held the struggling poacher, who was turning blue from lack of oxygen. "Please," I said, holstering my weapon and showing empty hands. "Let him go. These men will face human justice." For a long moment the alpha stared at me, an ancient intelligence evaluating my request. Then slowly, it lowered the poacher to the ground, releasing his throat. The man collapsed, gasping and coughing. The two other creatures looked to the alpha, clearly awaiting direction. It made a series of vocalizations, that complex language I had heard in the caves, and they moved toward the truck, gently lifting their unconscious companion. "Kanati," Davis's voice called from the trees. She emerged cautiously, her weapon holstered, eyes wide as she took in the scene. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I assured her. "Are you hurt?" She shook head. "No, but..." She glanced over her shoulder. "One of them found me, just stared at me. Then we heard the screaming and it left." The alpha approached me, moving with deliberate calm. It stopped an arm's length away, studying my face with those intelligent eyes. Then it reached out one massive hand, not toward me but toward my belt, where I had secured a small carved piece of the staff it had given me, fashioned into a pendant. Its fingers, more dexterous than they appeared, touched the carving gently. Then it looked directly into my eyes and made a single vocalization, a word I was certain, though in a language far older than any human tongue. "What is it saying?" Davis whispered. "I don't know the word," I replied softly. "But I understand the meaning. Guardian. It's acknowledging what we share. Protection of this forest." The alpha stepped back, then turned to its companions. They had already lifted their unconscious family member and were retreating into the forest shadows. With one final look at me, a look that conveyed both warning and respect, the alpha followed them, disappearing into the ancient woods that had concealed their kind for centuries. The poachers were secured and arrested, their equipment confiscated. Their employer remained a mystery, some private collector or unethical research organization with the resources to fund such an expedition. The investigation would continue, but I knew the true nature of what they had encountered would never appear in official reports. As Davis and I drove back to headquarters in the gathering dusk, she finally broke the contemplative silence. "What happens now? They've exposed themselves. These creatures. They can't stay hidden forever in today's world." I watched the ancient trees pass by outside the window, feeling their age, their wisdom, their secrets. "They've survived this long," I said, adapting, observing, remaining just beyond the edge of human knowledge. Perhaps that's where they belong, in that liminal space between myth and reality. "And what about you? Where do you belong in all this?" I touched the carved pendant at my belt, feeling its connection to something ancient and powerful. "Right here, between worlds, a guardian of both realms." As we drove through the darkening forest, I felt eyes watching from the shadows, not threatening, but aware. The forest had shared its greatest secret with me, and in doing so had bound me more tightly to this land than blood or duty ever could. The boundary between worlds had thinned, and I stood as sentinel at the crossing. Fall descended on the Tsalagi National Forest, painting the canopy in brilliant hues of red, orange, and gold. 3 months had passed since the encounter with the poachers, and outwardly, little had changed. I performed my regular duties as park ranger, leading nature walks, checking permits, ensuring visitors respected the wilderness. But inwardly, everything was different. The forest spoke to me now in ways I couldn't fully articulate. Weather changes, animal movements, the health of the ecosystem. I sensed these things with increasing clarity, as if the land itself communicated with me through some ancient frequency. The carved pendant I wore, fashioned from the staff given to me by the alpha creature, seemed to amplify this connection. Davis was the only one who knew the full truth. Sheriff Donovan suspected there was more to my story but respected my silence. The incident had been officially closed as a case of illegal poaching, with no mention of the creatures in any report. The poachers themselves had been charged with multiple federal offenses but maintained stories of pursuing an undiscovered primate species that no one believed. On this crisp October morning, I stood at the overlook near my cabin, watching the sun's first rays filter through the forest canopy. My radio crackled with a message from headquarters. Ranger Awiakta, we've got visitors from the Department of Interior asking for you specifically. Something about a new wildlife protection initiative. I frowned. No such meeting had been on my schedule. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I replied, already suspicious. When I arrived at headquarters, I found Davis waiting outside, her expression confirming my concerns. They're not from Interior, she said quietly as I approached. At least, not entirely. There's a guy from a private research foundation with them, very interested in our unique regional wildlife. Let me guess, particularly interested in reports of unusual primates? She nodded grimly. They've been reviewing all the incident reports from the past 5 years, including yours, though they seem disappointed by how little detail it contained. I took a deep breath. Time to meet our visitors. Inside, 3 people waited in the conference room. A woman in a crisp government suit who introduced herself as Dr. Eleanor Reed from the Department of Interior, and 2 men, Agent Thomas Blackwell from what he vaguely described as a specialized division of fish and wildlife, and Dr. Marcus Weber from the Everson Foundation for Evolutionary Research. Ranger Awiakta, Dr. Eleanor Reed began after introductions. We're here as part of a new initiative to document and protect undocumented species in national parks and forests. Your recent incident report caught our attention. I'm not sure which incident you're referring to, I replied carefully. Dr. Weber leaned forward, his keen eyes studying me. The rescue operation from July. 4 hikers, 2 of whom claimed to have encountered an unidentified bipedal creature. Your report mentioned an unknown predator, but was surprisingly vague on details. I maintained a neutral expression. I documented what was relevant to the rescue operation. The hikers were traumatized, dehydrated, and experiencing stress reactions. And yet, Agent Blackwell interjected, you personally entered a cave system alone and emerged with the 4th hiker. A remarkable feat. I know these mountains well, I said simply. It's my job to find lost hikers. Dr. Reed produced a folder of photographs, satellite images of the forest, with areas circled in red. We've identified several regions of interest for our survey. This area here, she pointed to a section that included the cave system, shows thermal anomalies consistent with underground habitation. We'd like you to guide a research team there. That area is currently restricted, I said. Unstable cave systems, dangerous for visitors. We have the proper clearances, Dr. Weber said, sliding a document across the table, signed by the Secretary of the Interior himself. I glanced at the paper without touching it. May I ask what exactly you're looking for in these caves? The 3 exchanged glances before Dr. Weber spoke. The Everson Foundation specializes in cryptid research, scientifically documenting species that exist in the boundary between folklore and zoology. We believe your forest may host a relict hominid population, what locals might call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Your Cherokee legends refer to it as Tzulkalu, I believe. Most of those legends also warn against disturbing such beings, I pointed out. Superstition has no place in scientific inquiry, Dr. Weber dismissed. If such creatures exist, they represent the most significant anthropological discovery of the century. Documentation is essential. And protection, Dr. Reed added quickly. Any such species would immediately receive endangered status and federal protection. I didn't believe her for a moment. The presence of the agent suggested other motivations, containment, perhaps, or exploitation. I'll need to consult with my supervisor before committing to guide any expedition into restricted areas, I said. Of course, Dr. Reed nodded. We hope to have your cooperation for the cave system by the end of the week. After they left, Davis joined me in the conference room. They're not going to give up, are they? No, I agreed. And they have the authority to access pretty much anywhere they want. So what do we do? If they find the creatures? I touched the pendant at my neck. I need to warn them. Tonight. Davis looked alarmed. You're going back to the caves? Alone? I might not need to go that far, I said. I think they'll know I'm coming. That night, I hiked deep into the forest under a nearly full moon. The autumn air was crisp, the forest floor carpeted with fallen leaves that whispered beneath my boots. I carried minimal equipment, just water, some food, a small first aid kit, and a flashlight I didn't expect to need. The moon provided sufficient illumination, and my connection to the forest guided my steps with unprecedented certainty. I didn't head directly for the cave system, but instead for a natural clearing about 2 miles into the restricted zone. There I built a small fire, not for warmth or light, but as a signal. Then I sat beside it, closed my eyes, and focused on the pendant, on my connection to the land. I seek audience with the forest guardians, I said in Cherokee, the ancient words feeling right. Danger approaches your home. I come to warn, as one guardian to another. The forest fell silent, the night creatures pausing in their activities as if listening. I waited, patient, certain. After perhaps an hour, I felt their presence before I saw them. Opening my eyes, I found 3 of the creatures standing at the edge of the clearing, the alpha in the center flanked by 2 others. They approached cautiously, moving with that strange grace that belied their size. The alpha stopped across the fire from me, the flames illuminating its features. The intelligent eyes, the powerful frame, the mixture of human and non-human characteristics that defied simple classification. Thank you for coming, I said. I bring warning. Humans seek your kind, humans with power and technology. They come to your territory tomorrow. The alpha made a series of vocalizations, gesturing toward the direction of the ranger station. Yes, I nodded. They have machines that can see heat, see in darkness. They will find your caves if you remain there. The alpha seemed to consider this, its eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Then it made a decision, turning to its companions and communicating in that complex language. One of them departed immediately, moving swiftly into the forest shadows. The alpha returned its attention to me, then did something unexpected. It sat down across the fire, assuming a cross-legged position that mirrored my own. The remaining companion stood watchful nearby. With deliberate movements, the alpha reached into a crude pouch made of woven plant fibers that hung at its waist. It withdrew something small and placed it on the ground between us. I leaned forward to see better in the firelight. It was a carved stone pendant, similar to ancient Cherokee artifacts I had seen in museums. The carvings depicted humans and the forest creatures standing together beneath stylized trees. The old pact, I whispered in recognition. The alpha vocalized softly, then pointed to the pendant, to itself, to me, and finally made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the forest around us. Guardians together, I interpreted. The land needs both. It nodded, understanding my words, if not the exact language. For the next hour, we communicated as best we could, through gestures, simple drawings in the dirt, and a gradually building comprehension that transcended conventional language. I learned that their community was ancient, predating human settlement in these mountains. They had observed Cherokee arrivals centuries ago, established a mutual respect based on shared reverence for the forest, and retreated further into the wilderness as European settlers expanded their reach. The pendant represented an ancient agreement. The Cherokee would respect certain territories as belonging to the forest beings, and in return the beings would act as guardians of the deeper wilderness, occasionally helping lost humans return to their proper realm. As our unusual council concluded, the alpha stood, towering over me once more. It pointed to the stone pendant, then to me, clearly indicating I should take it. Thank you, I said, accepting the gift. I will honor the old ways. The Alpha made a final series of vocalizations, its tone conveying urgency and purpose. Though I couldn't understand the specific sounds, the meaning was clear. Protect the forest, protect the secret, maintain the boundary between worlds. Then they were gone, melting into the darkness with that uncanny silence. I remained by the fire until dawn, formulating a plan. When I returned to headquarters, Davis was waiting anxiously. "Did you find them?" she asked when we were alone. "They found me," I replied, showing her the stone pendant. "And now I understand what I need to do." Over the next 3 days, I led Dr. Reed's team through the forest, carefully guiding them away from areas where signs of the creatures might be found. Each evening, strange incidents plagued their camp. Equipment malfunctioned, samples disappeared, batteries drained inexplicably. The forest itself seemed to conspire against their research. Sudden storms materialized over their survey sites. Trails became mysteriously blocked by fallen trees. Compass readings proved unreliable. Dr. Weber grew increasingly frustrated, especially when thermal imaging revealed nothing in the cave system, which appeared abandoned when we finally explored it. Any evidence of habitation had been meticulously removed. "Something's not right," he complained on the 4th day. "These readings don't match our satellite data at all. It's as if whatever was here knew we were coming." I maintained a neutral expression. The forest can play tricks on the unprepared. By the end of the week, Dr. Reed was ready to conclude their survey. "We'll need to analyze what little data we've collected," she told me as they packed their equipment. "But I must say, Ranger Awiakta, I expected more substantial findings based on the incident reports." "The forest reveals its secrets only to those who approach with respect," I replied. "Perhaps another time." Agent Blackwell approached me as they prepared to depart. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "The Everson Foundation has political connections. They'll be back with more resources, more authority. And the forest will still be here," I said calmly, "as will those who protect it." He studied me with narrowed eyes. "You know more than you're saying, Ranger. Much more." "I know that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed," I replied. "Some knowledge isn't meant for laboratories or government facilities. That you do not get to decide." "No," I agreed. "It's a much older decision. One made long before either of us was born." After their departure, I hiked once more to the clearing. Night was falling as I arrived, the forest settling into its evening rhythms. I built no fire this time. None was needed. "They're gone," I said to the watching darkness. "But they'll return eventually, more prepared, more determined." From the shadows, the Alpha emerged alone, moving silently despite its size. It approached until we stood face to face, guardian to guardian. With slow, deliberate movements, it reached out and touched the stone pendant I now wore alongside the wooden one. A connection formed between us, not words exactly, but understanding. Images flowed into my mind. The creatures moving deeper into the mountains to places even more remote, cave systems even I didn't know existed. They would adapt, as they had for centuries, retreat, observe, survive. But they would not abandon the forest entirely. Neither would they forget the pact. The Alpha's final communication was the clearest, a vision of myself standing at the boundary between the human world and the wilderness, between modern reality and ancient mystery. A sentinel, a keeper of secrets, a guardian of both realms. "I understand," I said, placing my hand over both pendants. "I will maintain the balance. I will protect the boundary." The Alpha nodded once, a profoundly human gesture from a being that defied human categorization. Then it melted back into the forest that had concealed its kind for millennia. In the months that followed, I continued my duties as park ranger, but with a deeper purpose that few could comprehend. The wooden pendant and stone amulet remained always with me, tangible reminders of my unique responsibility. Davis became my ally in this secret guardianship, helping divert attention from certain areas of the forest, ensuring that reports of strange sightings were properly explained in official records. Together, we maintained the boundary between worlds. Occasionally, deep in the forest, I would find signs that I was not alone in this vigilance. Unusual arrangements of stones marking safe paths, warning signs only I could recognize when dangerous weather approached, subtle indications that the forest beings still watched, still remembered the ancient pact. The Department of Interior team never returned, though I heard rumors of similar expeditions in other wilderness areas. The Everson Foundation published a paper dismissing the Salagi Forest as a site of cryptid activity, citing natural explanations for all observed phenomena. I smiled when I read it. On cold winter nights, when the forest lies silent under snow, I sometimes hear distant calls echoing through the mountains. Not quite human, not quite animal, but something in between. A reminder that beyond the edge of our understanding, ancient beings still move through the shadows of this world. I am Kanati Awiakta, park ranger and guardian of an older truth. I stand at the threshold between worlds, honoring the wisdom of my Cherokee ancestors while protecting the secrets of beings that modern science cannot classify. The forest has chosen me, as it chose those before me, to maintain the delicate balance between the known and the unknown. And in this sacred duty I have found my true purpose, not merely protecting the land from human excess, but preserving the mystery that makes the wilderness wild, the ancient pact that binds human and non-human guardians in shared reverence for something greater than ourselves. The forest keeps its secrets, and I keep the forest.